Chapter 421, The Iron-Walled Pirates. Admiral Warringstate's voice rang out through the command deck. Missing? Send word to headquarters at once. Launch a search. At his side, Admiral Kuzan snapped to attention. Moments later, he was dialing into the Navy's central communications channel. When the line clicked open, the shocked voice of headquarters crackled back. Admiral Kuzan, report. Kuzan's expression was grim. Marshal, Lieutenant General Garp has fallen overboard. He was struck during an engagement. There's no trace of him at sea. Silence hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then Fleet Admiral Kong himself burst through the door. What? His eyes widened. Garp? Gone? Before Kuzan could answer, Commander Sora stepped forward, voice tight with urgency. Sir, Garp was attacked by Charles Rockefeller and Charlotte Lingling. They fired upon him and knocked him into the water. He's badly injured and unaccounted for. We need immediate search and rescue. Marshal Kong's jaw clenched. He closed his eyes for a moment, then gave a curt nod. Understood. He cut the transmission. The office was suddenly still. Then, with a crack of splintering wood, Sora slammed his fist down on the polished table. It shattered beneath his blow. His face was a mask of fury and fear. Garp, that old pirate bastard! He squeezed his eyes shut, nostrils flaring. In his voice trembled the unspoken questions. How could Garp act without orders? Where was his sense of duty now? And most desperately, was their greatest hero, his mentor, trapped in the ocean's depths? Silence reclaimed the room as each officer stared at the wreckage of the table, hearts pounding at the same unanswerable thought. Could they find Garp in time? After venting his fury, Sora snatched up the Den Mushi and alerted the world government at once. When the admirals learned that Vice Admiral Garp had gone missing, apparently captured during the joint operation led by Charles Rockefeller and Charles Lingling, they ordered every available fleet in the New World to mount a full-scale rescue mission. Meanwhile, the titanic clash at the center of the New World had finally drawn to a close, and its outcome stunned everyone. No one saw it coming. The Navy had intervened at the height of the battle between the old and new pirate empires, cutting them off before either side could claim absolute dominance. Yet rumors quickly spread among those in the know. The Rockefeller pirates had delivered a crushing blow to the Big Mom pirates, driving them from the field. Word of that decisive victory fell like a hammer on the ears of the era's greats. Both Whitebeard and the Golden Lion stood silent upon hearing the news. Neither feared the top-tier combatants of their generation, yet the Rockefeller crew had nearly overwhelmed even them. From that day forward, the Rockefeller pirates were feared and respected under a new moniker, the Iron Wall Pirates. Charles Rockefeller's fleet was unrivaled in the New World. No pirate crew dared to underestimate them. Even the mighty Whitebeard pirates and the Sky Pirates watched the Rockefellers with unease. At Charles's command, drive the Big Mom pirates back into the Totland Sea, they struck swiftly and decisively. After only 2 days' rest, Charles resumed the offensive. He had kept a constant vigil on Charlotte Lingling, better known as Big Mom, and now gathered his captains for a direct assault. We hit her head on, he announced. Form 3 divisions and prepare to engage. The first wave was led by Carter and the Rockefeller pirates' most seasoned officers. Close behind came squadrons under Esdeath and Caesar, both members of the Rockefeller family. Finally, Captain Barrett mustered the 3rd Division, nearly 7,000 fighters ready for full-scale war. Attack! Their unified battle cry rolled across the sea. The strike sent shockwaves through the New World. No one had expected Charles Rockefeller to bounce back so fiercely after his last setback, and few believed the Big Mom pirates would fall apart so quickly. In mere every island and outpost Lingling had annexed slipped from her grasp. From atop her flagship, Big Mom's roar of rage shattered the silence. Damn you, Charles Rockefeller! Over the past months, Charles Lingling, young scion of the Charlotte clan, has thrown himself at the Rockefeller pirates time and again, but never with success. One by one, these islands once under Big Mom's rule fell into Barrett's hands. Rivers of blood stained the shores throughout the New World, the cries of the dying echoing in every shattered harbor. Mother, we have to pull back! This island's lost! Charles's younger siblings shouted as they scrambled toward Big Mom's flagship. Their faces were ashen with fear. No matter how proud the Charlottes were, Katakuri's children among them, they could not match the ferocious might of the Rockefeller Armada. On the bluff above the beach, Charles stood alone. Barrett's black and gold banner fluttered where the Charlotte standard had once flown. In his grip, his 7-star sword glowed a faint emerald light. A cruel smile curved his lips. "All right," he murmured, voice low with hate. "I'll be waiting." From the defeated shores, derisive cheers rang out. The Rockefeller pirates stamped and hollered, reveling in their conquest. The crackle of dying fires, the clatter of broken swords, the stink of salt and blood in the air. 6 months of unrelenting war had tested every man and woman among them. Now their veins pulsed with nothing but steel resolve and the taste of victory or defeat. And somewhere behind them, the Charlotte fleet was already weighing anchor, slipping away into the haze, preparing for the next clash. Because Charles Lingling would not forget this defeat, and would not rest until the Rockefeller banner lay in the dust at his feet. A cold, deadly aura washed over me the moment I stepped through the palace gates. 6 months of brutal warfare, and the Rockefeller pirates had clawed back every inch we'd ever claimed. They'd driven the Big Mom pirates all the way out of Totland's waters. Every victory we'd fought tooth and nail for over the past years lay in ruins. "Damn you, Charles. I'll cut you down for this." My mother's roar shattered the hall's tense silence. I found her pacing before the throne, a storm of rage and helplessness. "Mama, please," I began, trying to placate her. But my siblings surged forward, their own frustration flaring. "Calm down. If it weren't for your incompetence, we'd still hold every island." At that, Mother's eyes blazed with fury. She glared at each of us in turn. Silence fell, broken only by the soft clench of Katakuri's fist. I knew exactly what he was feeling. Over these past 6 months, he'd tested his strength against the Rockefeller line again and again, only to find himself outmatched. Douglas Barrett, the pirate's vice captain, had been untouchable. Even Caesar Rockefeller, the admiral's eldest son, offered no relief. That crushing defeat, however, did something unexpected. It ignited a deeper fire within Katakuri and the rest of us. We've trained without pause ever since, vowing that next time the Rockefeller pirates won't know what hit them, and we will reclaim Totland, no matter the cost. The once illustrious honor of the Charlotte family had vanished without a trace. "Return to your training." Charles Lingling's sharp command cut through the grand hall. "And if any of you remain as useless as you've been, you might as well die on the spot. There's no room for dead weight." His domineering presence swept across the room, draining the faces of every Charlotte until they stood wilted and silent. "Brother Katakuri!" they cried in unison, hurrying out of the hall to rally around their eldest. Outside, the younger Charlottes formed a tight circle around Katakuri. In this moment, he was their only rock. His battlefield exploits outshone even Prospero's. "From now on, train harder," Katakuri said, eyes warm but unyielding. "No more slacking off." "Yes, Brother Katakuri," they answered, determination burning in their eyes. With Katakuri's return, the real work would begin. The titanic struggle at the heart of the New World was over, ending with the Big Mom pirates' retreat to Totland. And after 6 long years, the Rockefeller pirates had once again proven themselves worthy of standing alongside the 4 emperors, their power undisputed on these merciless seas. Chapter 8. The Aftermath's Quiet and the World Shaken. Even the boldest pirate crews, once eager to pick a fight with the Rockefeller pirates, found their nerves shattered by word of that fearsome victory. One after another, they abandoned their schemes, slipping back into the shadows and muttering of lives not worth losing. Before long, the heart of the New World fell eerily silent. Trade routes that had once teemed with smugglers and bounty hunters lay empty. Merchant ships hugged the coasts, and war bands took refuge on hidden islets, all waiting, none daring to test the waters. Aboard the flagship of the Rockefeller pirates, Captain Charles stood on the deck, watching his crew tend to wounded comrades. Even in triumph, there was no jubilation here. Only exhausted heads bowed against the stain of blood on the planks. The taste of victory was strangely bitter when weighed against so much loss. Yet just as that uneasy calm settled over sea and ship alike, a single dispatch arrived from the world government's naval outpost on Dawn's Watch Island. Its message was brief, but the words it bore would echo farther and strike harder than any cannon volley. The Revolutionary Army has captured Marineford. Dragons have roared over the capital. The Shichibukai system is abolished. All pirates are ordered to stand down. In that moment, the uneasy hush was shattered. News of such seismic change, news that promised to redraw every map and topple every throne, spread like wildfire. Across the New World, from the lowest deckhand to the loftiest admiral, one thought burned in every mind. Nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 422, One Piece headlines splashed across every bulletin board and broadsheet in the world. The Roger pirates reappear in the East Blue. The Roger crew completes the first-ever circumnavigation of the Grand Line. Roger's men discover Raf Drew, Gol D Roger crowned Pirate King. The announcements hit like a thunderclap, rippling through every harbor, port, and trade lane. News of Roger's return and his elevation to Pirate King spread at lightning speed. Ships at sea cut anchor, and civilians crowded the docks in stunned silence. What did the resurgence of Gol D Roger mean for them? No one knew. And more often than not, it's the unknown that breeds the deepest fear. At sea, aboard Shiki's flagship, Shiki the Golden Lion leaned back in his captain's chair, casually flicking open a freshly printed newspaper. A sardonic grin curled his lips as he surveyed the headlines. "One Piece, you say? I couldn't care less," he drawled. "But mark my words, Roger, you'll bow before me yet." He laughed, a low, feral sound that echoed through the deck. His officers exchanged bored glances. After all, legends and rumors didn't frighten the Golden Lion pirates. In the Whitebeard's flagship yard, a young crewman thrust the newspaper at his superior. "Sir, look, Gol D Roger is the Pirate King now," he blurted. The burly commander snorted, tossing the paper aside. "King, that title belongs to our captain, Whitebeard, Edward Newgate." His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Around him, the rest of the Whitebeard pirates let out a collective snort of disbelief and amusement. "Ha! Roger a king? Hardly." Across the seas, from East Blue to the New World, the world's navies and pirates alike braced themselves. The Pirate King had returned, but whether he would bring fortune, fury, or utter chaos, none could say. All they knew was that the balance of power was about to shift once more. Whitebeard leaned back in his chair, drained his goblet of wine in one long swallow, and swept a challenging look across the dozen or so faces gathered before him. "Listen up," he rumbled. "Your old man here ought to be the Pirate King." A murmur ran through the room. At first there was a flicker of hesitation, uncertainty in their eyes, but in the next instant every man and woman sat a little straighter, determination replacing doubt. Caesar glanced up from the newspaper he'd been reading. "Pirate King?" he repeated, voice laced with skepticism. "Does it even matter if Gol D Roger earns that title first?" Charles lifted his glass of red wine, took a slow sip, then settled it with a soft clink on the table. His cool gaze drifted across Caesar, then to the others. Barrett's deadpan stare, Esdeath's barely concealed contempt, Tesla's keen interest, and the thinly veiled impatience etched on Robert's and Deidara's faces. "Why should we let Roger claim the crown?" Charles asked, voice low but charged. He set his elbows on the table, steepled his fingers, and locked eyes with each of them in turn. "Why don't we just take it from him? Make ourselves the Pirate King in his place?" Before anyone could answer, Robert sprang to his feet, ready to rally the room behind Charles's proposal. Charles simply rolled his eyes, his half-smile promising both mischief and mayhem to come. Charles smirked. "So you're really going to throw in the towel like Roger, sacrifice yourself, and declare a new age of discovery in front of the whole world? How dutiful of you!" Shialuo bristled at his tease, but Charles waved her off. "Calm down. As long as he doesn't challenge us for the title of Pirate King, I don't care what name he takes." He glanced back at the line of wide-eyed children. At Shialuo's jab, their excitement drained away, and they fell into a tense, frightened silence. On Cake Island of all nations, deep in the Totland Sea, a crowd had gathered around a creaking newsstand. The latest Gazette of the New World shouted its headline in bold, black letters, "Roger crowned Pirate King." A burly pirate banged his fist on the counter. Well, Roe. Jar, you thieving dog." Charles elbowed his way forward, snatched up the paper, and stared at the words. His cheeks burned with envy as he read about Roger's triumph. Around him, even the fiercest captains of the New World hesitated to challenge the newly anointed Pirate King. None dared rise against the Roger pirates, except Charles. But he alone seemed to take this crowning seriously. Meanwhile, somewhere in the East Blue, aboard the notorious ship Il Palazzo, Captain Bartholomew Drumroll raised his goblet high. "By my authority," he roared, "I hereby declare the Roger pirates disbanded." His crew exploded in cheers, yet amid the tumult, Roger stood calmly at the back, nursing a bottle of wine. When the uproar reached its peak, he took one long, deliberate drink and set the empty bottle on the deck. Silence fell over the banquet hall in an instant. Captain Roger set down his wine cup and looked around at his gathered crew. Silence fell over the deck as every pair of eyes locked onto him. "Roger," Rayleigh burst out, rising to his feet. His voice trembled. "You can't be serious. Our voyage isn't over yet." Roger cocked his head. "Why not?" Rayleigh's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You know why." He swallowed hard. I'm dying, old friend. I want my final moments to burn as brightly as our adventures once did." Roger laid a comforting hand on Rayleigh's shoulder. Rayleigh closed his eyes, fighting back tears. At once, the rest of the crew stood as well, Kozuki Odin with folded arms, Jabra and Kuroka flanking each other, and young Shanks and Bucky side by side. Both boys had tears streaming down their cheeks. "Captain, don't go," Shanks pleaded, voice cracking. "We need you." Bucky nodded fiercely. "This is our world now. Please stay with us." Roger let out a booming laugh that carried across the water. "My journey is ending here," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "But this world, your world, is just beginning." Gently, he lifted his treasured straw hat from his own head and placed it on Shanks's. The boy's hands trembled as he accepted it. With that, Roger shouldered his small pack, gave a final wave, never looking back, and stepped off the deck. The plank closed behind him, and he walked away into the unknown. His crew stood frozen, watching until his figure disappeared from sight. At last, someone whispered hoarsely, "Vice Captain." But the moment had passed. Captain Roger was gone. "What should we do now?" Jabba hurried up to Silver's Rayleigh, anxiety flickering in his eyes. "Without our vice captain, the Roger pirates, we're finished?" Rayleigh's face, lined with age and wariness, grew even more somber. A heavy silence fell over the deck, each crewman lost in his own thoughts. At last, Kozuki Odin was the first to step forward and disembark. "Everyone, until we meet again," Odin called over his shoulder, forcing a brave smile as he climbed down the gangplank. His retainers followed in silence, each exchange of farewells as brief as it was heartfelt. "Take care of yourself, Rayleigh," Jabba said, then was gone. One by one, the remaining pirates filed ashore. Soon only Rayleigh, Shanks, and Buggy remained aboard the once proud ship. Rayleigh cleared his throat, voice catching. "You two must stay strong from now on. No tears this time. Remember what we fought for." His eyes drifted to the straw hat perched on Shanks' head, and memories of the pirate king, Gol D Roger, and their epic voyage came flooding back. Shanks inclined his head. "Yes, sir. Take care, Vice Captain." Buggy followed suit, and the two friends left Rayleigh alone with the empty deck. Silence settled over the ship, save for the faint creak of wooden rope. Rayleigh stepped forward, placing a weathered hand on the railing. "You've carried me across every ocean. Old friend, now it's time for you to rest." As he spoke, the hull shivered gently beneath his touch, as if the ship itself were sighing, echoing the bittersweet end of an era. A few days later, Charles arrived at the harbor, his straw hat pulled low over his eye. He stepped onto the weathered planks and, with as much confidence as he could muster, announced, "I'm Charles, vice captain of the Roger pirates." Silence fell immediately. Charles's pulse thudded in his ears. From the shadows of the pier, a tall figure emerged. Long, red hair tumbled down his back, and at his side hung a curved blade so large it seemed to hum with barely contained power. "Tell me where Roger is," the stranger said, his voice as cold and unyielding as steel. "The commotion you made has already angered him." Before Charles could answer, the man's hand flew to his sword hilt. The very air around them thickened, as if frozen in place. Fear propelled Charles into motion. His only thought was, run. He dashed toward an awaiting launch at the end of the dock. But the red-haired pursuer was already in stride, closing the distance with effortless speed. Charles leapt aboard the small boat and shoved off, oars flashing in his frantic grip. Across the waves, a warship rose into view, its black hull bearing down on him. From the deck, A vortex of blue energy coalesced into razor-sharp arcs, slicing the water where Charles had been seconds before. With a thunderous crack, his skiff splintered under the blast. Charles tumbled into the sea, frantic kicks driving him away from the wreckage. He aimed for a calmer patch of water, anything to distance himself from that relentless warship. Then a single, devastating slash cut through the surface of the ocean, sending a towering wall of water crashing in every direction. Charles's scream was swallowed by the roar of the sea. Chapter 423, The Undercurrent of the World. Silver's Rayleigh bore down against the agony coursing through his body, each stroke a struggle, but still he pushed toward the looming windless zone ahead. From the deck of the pursuing ship, an agent shouted hoarsely, "Captain, a dead calm. There's no wind. Our sails won't carry us in." The red-haired captain, Shanks, watched Rayleigh's battered form through a spyglass. He turned away with a dismissive snort. "Let him live for now. Secure the crew below deck and summon any information on Gol D Roger's whereabouts at once." "Aye, sir." The agent sheathed his sword and hurried off to obey. With its orders given, Shanks's ship tacked about, silently retreating from the placid sea where Rayleigh drifted, wounded and alone. Time lost all meaning. Rayleigh's consciousness flickered as he fought off unconsciousness. His vision blurred, pain and salt water stinging his eyes. He thought, am I going to give up my story here? Just as his strength threatened to abandon him, a curious figure glided through the water, a fishman whose head sprouted octopus tentacles. With a playful tilt of his voice, he called out, "What's a lone human doing in this part of the sea?" Before Rayleigh could answer, the octopus man scooped him into his arms and dove toward a nearby island. As they approached land, word of the Roger pirates' fate burst across every horizon. The Roger pirates have disbanded. The pirate king, Gol D Roger himself, has vanished. The shocking announcement spread like wildfire from the Grand Line to the New World. Every pirate crew, every Navy outpost, buzzed with the same frantic question. What in the world is happening to the legend of Gol D Roger? Pirates all over the seas were stunned by the bulletin that blinked across every tavern notice board. Roger, the pirate king, has disbanded his crew. Some scratched their heads in confusion. Many more sighed in relief. To those buccaneers, the name Gol D Roger had always towered over them like an immovable mountain. With the Roger pirates scattered, their fiercest rival was gone. In a dim, crowded tavern on a bustling port island, rough-cut sailors crowded around a weathered poster. One grizzled pirate hurled his tankard down so hard the ale splashed the floor. "Roger's gone? Then I'll find him. I'll kill him and claim the title of Pirate King myself." Another scuffed his boot against a loose floorboard. "You're mad. Roger's invincible. But with his crew broken, maybe there's a chance." A hush fell over the room. From a dark corner, a wiry man raised his voice. "Forget killing Roger. There's something far more important." All heads turned as he leaned forward, eyes glinting. "It's the one piece we should be after. Who here will brave the seas and seize the title of Pirate King?" A roar of approval swept the tavern. "I'm in. Count me in. To the Grand Line, then." Laughter and shouts echoed off the stone walls. "One piece. Now that's a prize worth hunting." Meanwhile, far to the north, a slender ship painted with flamingo crests sliced through the calm blue waters. On deck, a young man in a tailored pink coat and dark sunglasses folded away a freshly printed newspaper, his lips curling into a satisfied smile. Below, two attendants exchanged nervous glances before one broke the silence. "Young Master Charles, what are your orders?" Charles tapped his chin thoughtfully. "First, tie up our underground operations in Beihai Harbor. Once that's settled, we set sail for the Grand Line." His Lieutenant Dover cleared his throat. "And the Germa Kingdom? They've been making demands." Charles's smile grew wider, determination shining in his eyes. "Tell Germa their invitation stands. We'll deal with them once we've reached the New World. Right now, our course is clear. We chase the One Piece." He turned back to the horizon, letting the sea breeze touzle his coat. The world had just shifted beneath every pirate's boots, and Charles intended to be at the very forefront of the new age of adventure. Dover, better known in the underworld as Doflamingo, leaned on his carved ebony cane and stared out at the endless sea. "So that king has been undercutting us in the weapons market?" he murmured, lips curling into a sly grin. A soft, ruminative chuckle escaped him. Heh, let him rile up the powers that be. Someone will take care of him soon enough. Far to the northeast, across the churning waters of the North Sea, another power was rising. 4 years earlier, Vinsmoke Gagey had broken away from the Rockefeller pirates. Armed with cutting-edge technology and ruthless ambition, he declared war on every kingdom in these waters. In just 66 days, his forces bulldozed through Beihai's small principalities and mighty duchies alike, leaving conquest in their wake. The world government, thunderstruck, finally decided to respond. A marine squadron, commanded by the famed Yellow Ape, Admiral Porusolino, rushed into the fracas. "Yo, yo, yo," Porusolino barked as his flagship cut through the swell. "The Germa Kingdom's really not messing around." Standing beside him, Admiral Kizaru watched impassively. Wave after wave of soldiers surged forward, unflinching, unhesitating, mechanical in their violence. If Charles had seen this scene, he would have been enraged. Gagey had concealed the truth. These troops weren't volunteers or conscripts, but clones, engineered without emotion and trained solely for killing. In only 4 years, the Germa Kingdom had grown into a force that now threatened to rewrite the balance of power in the North Sea. Vinsmoke Gagey had succeeded in developing this new weapon with the backing and resources of the Rockefeller pirates. But he hadn't told Charles a word. He'd kept it all hidden. Then, out of nowhere, Vice Admiral Kizaru's voice echoed through the sky. "Bachi Kyongo Yu!" In an instant, Kizaru leapt into the air, his palms glowing with blinding radiance. Twin beams of pure light shot downward and cut through the Germa Kingdom's foot soldiers like thunderbolts. None of them lived to see another breath. "Bastards!" Gagey spat, rage burning behind his eyes. He gave the order he'd been dreading. "Fall back!" Despite every instinct urging him to stand his ground, Gagey had no choice but to retreat. Under Kizaru's command, the Germa Kingdom's grasp on the North Blue collapsed utterly. Their rule over Beihai had lasted a pitiful 66 days, long enough only to earn them the mocking nickname Germa 66. As smoke curled from shattered fortifications and the screams of the dying faded, Gagey stood among the ruins, his hatred for Kizaru swelling to new heights. In his mind, he replayed the stolen research he'd pilfered from Dr. Vegapunk's original notes. Devil fruits, synthetic soldiers, the blood factor experiments that had promised to make Germa invincible. And yet here they were, broken, defeated, exposed. Silence reigned over the devastated outpost. Far to the west, another force was already stirring. A rippling laugh carried over the deck of a pirate ship. "Heh heh! Kids, raise the sails. The Moonlight Pirates set off at last." "Here I come, the Pirate King," roared Captain Moria, standing tall on the quarterdeck. Before him stretched the product of 4 relentless years, thousands of pirates united under his flag. His chest swelled with pride as the assembled crew thundered back their approval. Long live Captain Moria! Long live Captain Moria! It had taken 5 hard-won years for the Moonlight Pirates to claim the crown of the Western Seas. Tales of Moonlight Moria had spread far and wide. He was hailed as a hero by every port and village. Now, with his fleet at full strength, Moria was ready to set sail for the wider world. He fixed his gaze on the distant horizon. "Those Rockefeller pirates, especially you, Charles Rockefeller, just wait. One day I'll eclipse you." Far to the east, on a lonely island in the East China Sea, the scattered remnants of the beast pirates had kept their heads down for 7 years. It was Charles, a brash young upstart, who had defeated Kaido back then. Alongside him, Jin and Quinn had escaped the Bro Yuin of Onigashima, carrying Kaido's only heir, the child princess Yamato. Together they had sailed into hiding on this remote rock. A little girl came bounding up the shore, a crumpled newspaper clutched in her hand. "Uncle Jin," she called, her eyes dancing with excitement. "What exactly is a pirate king?" Jin paused in his watch over the sea and turned to look at Yamato. A gentle smile softened his weathered features. Stooping to ruffle her hair, he asked, "Yamato, do you dream of becoming the pirate king someday?" Charles looked up at Jin with wide eyes. "Uncle Jin, what is One Piece?" Jin's lips curved into a knowing smile. "One Piece is the greatest treasure in the world, rumored to grant its finder absolute freedom and unrivaled power at sea." Charles's small fists clenched at his sides. "Then I'll become the pirate king. I'll grow stronger and avenge father." Jin ruffled Charles's hair affectionately. "That's the spirit. We're all counting on you." Nearby, Jinyan flashed a mischievous grin. Uncle Jin, who is my enemy? Jin's expression darkened for a moment as he exchanged a meaningful glance with Charles. Not yet, Jinyan. Once you've trained hard and proven yourself strong enough, I'll tell you everything. For now, you're not ready. Charles drew himself up, determination shining in his eyes. Then I'll become strong, no matter what it takes. A sudden chill in the air made them all turn. Jin, you're here. A deep voice rumbled as Quinn, a mountain of a man, strode forward. He shifted awkwardly under Jin's gaze. Running low on funds again? Jin teased. Quinn scratched the back of his neck. Well, this latest research project, expenses got a bit out of hand, Jin laughed. If you spent half as much on experiments as you do fireworks, you'd have more than enough gold. Quinn's cheeks flushed. Ah, Miss, he swallowed nervously. Good to see you too. He let out an embarrassed chuckle, glancing at Jinyan and Charles, who grinned in return. The small crew stood together on the deck, each resolve strengthened by the promise of grand adventures yet to come. Yamato raced over, beaming. Uncle Quinn, he called out cheerfully. Chapter 424, The Undercurrent of the World. Charles offered Yamato a warm smile, until he noticed the broadsheet clutched in Yamato's hand. His grin faded as he leaned closer. Jin, when are we finally setting sail? He asked, trying to keep his voice light. Jin didn't hesitate. When Yamato comes of age. Another 10 years? Charles groaned, running a hand through his hair. That's forever. I'm already aching for the old days with Kai. Jin's expression hardened. Watch your tongue. Charles fell silent. Yamato, clearly annoyed by the sudden tension, shoved past them both. Don't mind them. I'm off to spar with Jack. With that, he was gone in a flash, heading for the training ring. Jin let out a soft sigh, then turned back to Charles. We haven't had a proper session in ages. Let's see if you've let yourself slack off. Blue flames curled from Jin's arms, casting dancing shadows across the deck planks. Charles drew in a steadying breath. All right, let's go. Before he could brace himself, Jin sprang forward, a gleaming blade whistling toward his chest. Charles barely had time to shout, "You sneak!" when he invoked his gift. His body exploded outward, bones and sinew twisting into the massive form of a brachiosaurus. The dagger clanged harmlessly against Charles's thick-necked scales as he reared back, roaring a challenge. And so their duel began, flames against prehistoric might, echoing the restless undercurrent that swirled through their world. That afternoon, somewhere on the East Blue, Jack stood alone on the deck of a battered merchant ship, repeating the sparring drill Brother Jin had taught him. His legs were planted wide, mace in hand, sweat trickling down his brow. "Jack, let's go," came a sharp voice. Yamato strode forward, drawing her own heavy iron club from her back. Jack crossed his arms. The metal guard clamped over his mouth, hiding his sharp fishman teeth. "Don't hold back," he challenged, his eyes betraying the respect he'd long held for her. 7 years ago, Jin had rescued Jack and brought him from the New World to the East Blue. Since then, he'd waited for Yamato, his future captain, to grow into her power. Yamato gripped her mace. "You'll know whether you can beat me once we start." Before Jack could reply, Yamato swung. The impact rang out. Clatter, a spray of sawdust from the training floor. Jack braced himself, moving only to block. He wasn't allowed to strike her back, only defend. They clashed again and again, Yamato's raw strength against Jack's quick, practiced parries. Jack ducked under a downward blow, rolled aside, then brought his mace up in a solid guard. Yamato spun on the spot, sending him staggering. Dust rose around them with each thunderous strike. Their spar continued, Jack pushing his defenses to the limit, Yamato testing every opening. And though he couldn't fight back fully, Jack grinned behind his guard, eager for the day he'd match her blow for blow. Elsewhere on the same stretch of sea, a small, red-haired man lounged on a battered cutter. Beside him, a hulking crewmate, Bucky, tugged at his rumpled shirt, stomach growling. "Shanks! I'm starved. When are we going to eat?" Bucky complained, dropping into a seat. Shanks glanced up from his maps, one crooked grin tugging at his lips. "Soon, Bucky. Patience. Our next port's just ahead." Bucky sighed, slumping in his seat. "I've been patient long enough." Shanks only chuckled, tapping the deck with the butt of his pistol as the cutter rode the swells toward its next adventure. Shanks led the way down the bustling street, his stomach growling louder with every step as the scents of sizzling skewers and sweet buns drifted through the air. He glanced back at Bucky, who was clutching his empty stomach. "Hold on, Bucky," Shanks murmured. "Once we earn some coins, I'll get us a proper meal." Since leaving the ship, the two boys had drifted from island to island in the East China Sea, their pockets now as empty as their bellies. Bucky's eyes filled with tears. "I'm starving," he whimpery sounded. Shanks winced, then scanned the busy thoroughfare. A mischievous spark lit his eyes. With a quick nod, he bolted toward a grand inn at the street's end. "Stop them! They've eaten the king's special feast without paying," the innkeeper roared as he burst from the door. Shanks grabbed Bucky's hand and they sprinted through the crowd. Bucky skidded around a corner, crying out, "Too full for you now?" Shanks laughed, tugging his straw hat firmly in place. "Only a fool bites off more than he can chew," he called back, and the two boys vanished into the maze of alleyways, their laughter echoing behind them. Chapter 6. They burst out of the tavern into the sunlit street, hearts pounding as the evening sky blazed orange overhead. Behind them, a squad of marine constables fanned out, bayonets glinting, shouting for their quarry to halt. But Roger only laughed, a low, roaring sound, and seized Luju's hand. Together, they charged down a narrow alley, weaving between barrels and market stalls, seawater salty wind whipping at their cloaks. Luju stumbled on a loose cobblestone. Roger reached out, gently steadying her. Her eyes widened as she brushed back her hood. "Roger, is that really you?" she whispered, voice trembling with disbelief. He paused for a heartbeat, then pulled off his cloak. "It's been too long, my love." His grin was as bright as the gold-rimmed sunset. Luju threw her arms around him. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. 3 months later, in a quiet seaside hamlet on the South China Sea, Luju leaned her head against Roger's chest, one hand resting on her gently rounded belly. The cradle of his heart beneath her ear thumped in steady rhythm. "What shall we name our child?" she asked softly, tracing the swell of new life within her. Roger's eyes shone with tenderness. "If it's a boy, he'll be called Ace," he said, tenderly caressing her belly. "And if it's a girl, Anne." Luju smiled, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Then I shall insist they carry my family name, too. Porcus D. Ace and Porcus D. Anne." He echoed the names slowly, savoring each syllable. "Porcus D. Ace, Porcus D. Anne." With that, he pressed a gentle kiss to her brow. Luju's smile faltered, worry flickering in her eyes. "How long?" she asked after a moment's hesitation. "Can you stay here with me?" Roger's arms tightened around her. He drew in a slow breath as if gathering courage. 6 more months, he admitted, no more. Silence settled between them. Luju traced playful circles on his shoulder, then leaned in to rest her head against him. He held her close, both of them savoring the precious seconds before duty called him away once more. The day they set sail dawned bright and windless. Roger stood at the prow of the small cutter they'd secured, Luju at his side, clutching the rope rail as the shoreline slipped away. Their boat cut through azure waves, the promise of a grand voyage stretching before them. Suddenly, a lookout's urgent cry rang out. "Ship off the port bow, bearing the colors of the Marines." Roger's expression grew serious. He grasped Luju's hand. "Stay below deck until I say otherwise." He turned to the crew, voice crisp with command. "All hands, prepare for pursuit." Luju took one last fearful breath of the sea air, then ducked below as cannon flashes bloomed on the distant horizon. Roger squared his shoulders, heart steeled for the storm to come. Whatever lay ahead, he would meet it head-on, for his love, for his unborn children, and for the freedom he'd sworn never to surrender. A lone coffin ship drifted into view before the warship's prow. In an instant, a blade of shimmering energy sliced through the water, rending the vessel in two. Sea spray boiled as the ruined halves sank beneath the waves. "How tedious," Dracul Mihawk murmured, standing at ease on the coffin's deck. He sheathed his sword and glanced back toward the shattered warship. "Rockefeller Charles, your grand entrance won't go unrewarded, but the title Pirate King, hardly original." No sooner had he spoken than a pulse of raw power rippled through the air. Mihawk's eyes narrowed. With casual precision, he swept his blade in a single, fluid arc. Arc Moon Sand Dunes. A deafening roar erupted. A maelstrom of sand billowed into being, blocking the sword's path with a wall of whirling dust. Mihawk frowned, sheathing his sword once more. "Devil fruit users. always trying to steal the show. His calm was abruptly shattered by a harsh voice from a nearby ship. "You bastard! That was your attack!" Mihawk straightened. On the deck of the opposing vessel stood a formidable figure, broad-shouldered and towering, a long scar slashed across his face. A single earring dangled from his right ear, a lit cigar smoldered at his lips, and a gleaming gold hook replaced his left hand. He wore a black coat that fluttered in the wind as he glared down at the coffin ship. "Crocodile," Mihawk said quietly, recognition lighting his eyes. Years ago, this very man had dared to challenge Edward Newgate, Whitebeard himself. He'd lost an arm in the attempt, but somehow lived to tell the tale. Mihawk allowed himself a thin, appreciative smile. It's been some time. The two swordsmen regarded one another across the gap of roiling sea, each calculating the other's next move. And so, on the breaking waves, a new duel began. Charles stood at the edge of the new world, ready to set sail for the Grand Line's final stretch, when he was intercepted on a barren, desert-swept island by Douglas Barrett, vice-captain of the Rockefeller Pirates. Barrett's reputation as a master swordsman was well earned, but neither he nor Charles would yield. Their blades clashed relentlessly under the scorching sun, each strike met with an equally fierce parry. When the dust settled, it was clear. The fight was a draw. Word of that stalemate spread like wildfire. Charles, whose exploits had already become the stuff of legend when he faced Whitebeard and lived, was now hailed as the newest supernova on the seas. To challenge Whitebeard and then hold Douglas Barrett to a standstill was a feat few could claim. The name Crocodile echoed in every port and tavern. Not long afterward, the Marines slapped an 8 billion berry bounty on Charles's head. For many, it was the first glimpse of Crocodile's wanted poster, yet the sum still lagged behind the price on Hawkeye's Mihawk, an astounding figure for the world's greatest swordsman, even before he set foot in the New World. Charles's lips curled into a wry smile as he surveyed the horizon from his ship's prow. A lone vessel cut through the waves, its deck shadowed by a single towering figure. The man bore a black overcoat, and in his hand gleamed an immense cruciform blade. "Do you know who I am?" Charles called, his voice carrying across the water. The swordsman halted at the bow of his flagship, eyes narrowing beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He lifted his blade with deliberate slowness, its steel catching the late afternoon light like the glint of an eagle's talon. "Dracul Mihawk," Charles declared, drawing himself to his full height. "I challenge you." For a long moment, Mihawk answered only with his icy, eagle-like gaze, an unspoken promise of the battle to come. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath as two of the world's most formidable fighters prepared to clash once again. Chapter 425, The Fury of Kozuki Oden. Charles stood at the prow of the ship, his eagle-sharp eyes fixed on the two titans before him. On one side was Crocodile, the notorious former warlord of the sea, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. On the other stood Dracul, Hawkeye's Mihawk, the greatest swordsman in the world, his black blade resting lightly on his shoulder. "You really don't know when or how to die, do you?" Crocodile hissed, amusement flickering in his gaze as he glanced at Charles. Then he turned back to Mihawk and clenched his fists. Sand swirled around his hands, forming into dark, churning clouds. "Let's see how you handle this," he roared. "Sarah San!" Crocodile unleashed a roaring sandstorm that tore across the deck. The very ocean around the ship seemed to turn to desert as the tempest whipped the waves into frothing turbulence. Mihawk's eyes narrowed to slits. With a single, effortless motion, his black sword slashed through the swirling sand. The blade cut it apart as cleanly as slicing bamboo. Crocodile's smirk faded. "Not bad," he muttered under his breath. Then, calling on his devil fruit power once more, he transformed his right arm into a massive sand blade. Desert King Kong's sword. The colossal sand blade swung toward Mihawk with earth-shattering force. The deck shuddered beneath its might as it bore down on the world's finest swordsman. With grim resolve, Mihawk brought his sword across his own body in a horizontal arc. The clash rang out like thunder, sparks flying as steel met sand. Yet the sand blade shattered against Mihawk's unwavering blade, the fragments dissolving into fine dust that drifted away on the wind. Crocodile's expression darkened, his amusement replaced by fierce respect. He redoubled his efforts, summoning pillar after pillar of sand to crush Mihawk under an avalanche of grit. Each assault was met by Mihawk's unerring blade, cut, block, parry, repeated without hesitation. The two powers ripped through the afternoon, each testing the other's limits. Charles watched in awe as the titanic duel raged on. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon blood-red, and still neither combatant gave ground. Finally, as dusk settled, Crocodile sheathed his power. The swirling sand dissipated in the dying light, leaving only the two warriors standing, exhausted but unbowed. Crocodile's lips curved into a rueful smile. He offered Mihawk a nod of genuine admiration. "Dracul Mihawk," he said, "I won't forget your name." Mihawk inclined his head in return, his single gaze never leaving Crocodile's face. Then, without another word, Crocodile turned on his heel and strode away, vanishing into the gathering shadows. Charles let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The sea was calm once more, but the memory of that epic clash, the fury of sand and steel, would linger with him forever. The deck of the ship trembled violently under their feet, so badly that it might have collapsed entirely. Waves crashed around them, and the roar of battle filled the air. Mihawk watched Crocodile make his retreat across the broken planks. "He won't survive long out there," he muttered, tightening his grip on his sword's hilt. Still, he did not pursue. He knew all his success so far had come from exploiting this terrain. There would be other chances. Sheathing his blade, Mihawk folded his arms and lowered himself onto the deck. He stared out at the churning sea. "This isn't over," he said simply. Their clash had been fated in more ways than one. One warrior's departure would not alter the currents of history. New figures were about to step onto the world's stage. Their stories would shape the age to come. 1,000 miles away, in the heart of Wano country, Charles sat at a lacquered table in his palace, studying the latest dispatches. His young face was lit by the glow of red lanterns. Caesar stood silently at his side, waiting. Charles folded the report and glanced at his advisor. "Barrett just called," he said quietly. "This newcomer, he's a natural Shasha fruit user, and with the desert amplifying Crocodile's powers, it'll be some time before we can bring him down." Caesar nodded, concern flickering in his eyes. Charles leaned back, letting out a slow breath. A thrill ran through him. This unexpected meeting, these entwined destinies, was it fate that had brought them all to this moment? What path lay before him now? He set the parchment aside. Whatever the future held, he would face it head-on. Charles leaned over the hollow display, brow furrowed. "Have you pinpointed the location of Orochi's Black Carbon gang?" Ravel tapped the screen. "They're holed up in Kuri. Most of the locals, openly or in secret, are backing Orochi's faction." Charles turned to Caesar. "You and Ravel will depart for Kuri at once. Wipe out every last stronghold." Caesar grimaced. He knew all too well how brutal Wano could be. Its terrain was still scarred by the volcanic eruption from 6 years ago. But Charles gave no quarter to his hesitation. Their clash with Lingling had ended in a stalemate, and Charles seized the moment to press his advantage. He'd left Barrett and Esdeath to oversee Kame Island. Now he would personally secure Wano's most volatile province. In his hand lay fresh intelligence. The Roger pirates had disbanded in the East Blue, scattering their crew. All signs pointed to one inescapable truth. Kozuki Oden was on his way back. Without Charles at the helm, Ravel alone wouldn't stand a chance against Oden's fury. "Understood," Caesar muttered, resigning himself to the mission. Charles allowed himself a thin smile. His orders were clear. Now it was time to see them carried out. Elsewhere, a lone ship carved a path through the churning waters of the New World. "Your Majesty Oden will reach Wano country in 3 days." Kinemon, one of the 9 Red Sky heroes, strode up to Lord Kozuki Oden and spoke with urgency. Oden stood at the ship's prow, staring into the vast, empty horizon. He did not turn, but his voice carried over the wind. "Kinemon, tell me exactly what's happened in Wano." Kinemon bowed, his expression grave. "While we were on Zoo, word reached us that the Rockefeller pirates had taken control of our homeland. At first, I could hardly believe it, but every retainer we spoke to confirmed the same terrible tale." Oden's grip tightened on the railing, knuckles whitening. Kinemon pressed on. 7 years ago, do you remember Kaido of the 100 Beasts? His crew, the 100 Beasts pirates, joined forces with the Kutan family's Black Carbon Orochi and other rogue bands to invade Wano. They overran our defenses and captured your father, shattering the Kozuki shogunate." A flash of pain crossed Odin's face. Kinemon continued. Then, unexpectedly, the Rockefeller pirates appeared on our shores. What began as a clash between them and Orochi's forces quickly drew Kaido back into the fray. Soon the entire country was engulfed in war. Odin turned at last, his dark eyes burning with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Kinemon lowered his voice. Their battle beneath the Salamonica throne trembled the very earth. The sacred Mount Amatsukami erupted under their blows. Rivers of molten rock poured down upon the land. Villages were wiped out, our people incinerated in an instant. In the end, Kaido was slain by Charles of the Rockefeller pirates. Silence fell between them as Odin processed the news. The wind whipped his hair, carrying ash-colored soot from distant flames. Kinemon stood unwavering, ready to serve. Odin exhaled slowly and met his retainer's steady gaze. Prepare the men. We sail for Wano at dawn. It's time to reclaim our home. Kinemon bowed deeply. As you command, your majesty. Wano has fallen into the hands of the Rockefeller pirates. To cement their control, the pirates slaughtered the samurai and crushed every stronghold. Now the people of Wano cling to the hope that His Highness will return and drive the Rockefeller pirates from their land. Kinemon spoke quietly, his words blunt. So, Wano is destroyed? Kozuki Odin closed his eyes. His voice was calm, calm, as if a storm lay coiled beneath it. Yes. Everything's been leveled, except the rabbit den. Kinemon's jaw tightened. He shut his eyes, fury barely contained. And my father? Where is he? Odin's eyes remained shut. He's being held in Tokoyama Manor. There's every chance he perished in the volcano's eruption. A rough sound tore from Kinemon's throat. At that moment, Odin's eyes snapped open. An aura of raw, unyielding power flared around him. His voice rang out like a verdict from on high. Charles Rockefeller! The ship shuddered as endless malice poured from Odin's words. Behind him, the 9 red scabbards stood silent, their expressions a mixture of awe and dread, witnesses to a man transformed, as if a god had donned the mantle of a demon. Kozuki Odin stood at the rail, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Your Highness, Kinemon ventured, bowing deeply, should we send word to the Whitebeard pirates? They're the only fleet with the strength to— No. Odin's reply cut through the salty air. He turned on Kinemon, all trace of his old mirth gone. I have already left Whitebeard's crew. I won't ask them to shoulder my battles for me. Kinemon shook his head, desperation in his voice. But this is Rockefeller Charles we're talking about. The world's greatest swordsman, renowned alongside Roger and Whitebeard themselves. He's not someone we can face lightly. Odin's gaze sharpened. A low rumble grew in his chest. So what? He spat. If I fail to settle this debt in my own hands, then I'll be a man without honor. I'll personally slay Rockefeller Charles and avenge my father. His words struck the little band to silence. Each man bowed his head, afraid even to meet his furious glare. Below deck, the sails snapped as the ship drew closer to Wano. On the shore, Charles felt a tremor in the air. He lifted his chin, sensing the coming storm. It's time, he whispered. All right, Charles murmured in the shadowed corridor. Let's settle everything right here. Beyond the hall's stone walls, over the lands of Wano, specifically the ravaged plains of Julie, a colossal dragon cleaved the sky. Its massive wings beat the air into thunderous gusts, and from its gaping maw it unleashed a relentless barrage of fireballs. Each blazing orb cratered into the ranks of Wano's samurai, turning brave warriors to ash almost as soon as they cried out. In the flickering torchlight, Charles steadied himself. The roar of the dragon echoed through the hall, rattling ancient beams overhead. Now, with enemy soldiers dropping by the dozen outside, there was no turning back. This was the moment to act or be consumed by the flames. Chapter 426. Kozuki Odin versus Charles Flames roared all around as a handful of warriors, blackened and blistered like charred charcoal, scrambled into the nearby forest. Damn it! Spat their leader, known among his men as the Black Charcoal Serpent. Panic clawed at him. The inferno seemed alive, its flickering tongues reaching out with hungry intent. Above, a colossal dragon wheeled in the sky, its throat rumbling in triumph. 7 years ago, he had bargained with such a beast. Now, it pursued him. Was this divine retribution? He refused to believe it. High overhead, Caesar let out an exasperated groan. Ugh, this is boring. Let's finish them quickly. With a single, graceful twist, he plummeted toward the fleeing band, unleashing a barrage of blistering fireballs. Each fiery orb struck home. Warriors were swallowed by flame, their agonized screams echoing through the trees. Caesar winced at the howls, but pressed on. More! Send them swiftly to their rest. Moments later, he alighted before a grand hall, ash drifting from his wings. In one hand he gripped his gleaming blade, in the other the severed head of the black charcoal serpent. "Father, I bring you his head." The massive doors swung open. Inside, Charles stood waiting, his expression as cold and steady as his blade. He took in the gruesome trophy without a word, his eyes unblinking. Charles stood atop the dais in the grand hall, his gaze sweeping over the assembled officers. "String his head up in Rabbit Bowl Market," he ordered, voice low and deadly. Let all of Wano quake at the sight. Beside him, Caesar Baloo's lips curled into a resentful pout. In Charles's mind, terror was the only leash strong enough to control these people. Without waiting for a response, Charles strode from the chamber. Soldiers carried forward the severed head of the dreaded black charcoal snake, and at the heart of Rabbit Bowl Market, they mounted it on a tall pole. The grisly trophy gleamed in the noon sun, and word spread like wildfire. The Rockefeller pirates were not to be crossed. A sudden stillness fell over the streets of Wano. Merchants froze at their stalls, children shrank behind their parents, and even the hardened samurai cast wary glances at one another. Despite himself, Charles felt a grim satisfaction. In his eyes, Wano would prosper far more under the unyielding and profitable rule of the Rockefeller pirates than under those self-aggrandizing generals and corrupt noble houses who bled the country dry. Yet the people clung, in hushed tones, to the memory of the black charcoal Orochi. Their whispered loyalty was a slap to his face. So he issued a second decree, colder than the steel of his blade. Those who refuse to swear fealty as citizens shall be stripped of their dignity and made slaves in the quarry. At once, pirate detachments fanned out across the countryside. Any man or woman suspected of Orochi sympathies was dragged from home and hearth, shackled in iron, and marched to the notorious Rabbit Bowl quarry. There, under the pitiless glare of the sun, they were forced to mine rock and ore until their bodies broke, slaves in every sense but name. By nightfall, Wano was hushed under an iron silence. Fear, not defiance, reigned in every heart. The proud streets that once rang with laughter and song were now filled only by the clinking of chains and the slow, shuffling footsteps of those who dared not resist. Caesar stood at Charles's side, spitting onto the rough stones of the plaza. He met Charles's gaze with a hard, dark look. In Wano, time now dragged like a wounded animal, each moment a reminder that the Rockefeller pirates held the reins of power and no one could break free. Charles was weaving his way through the crowded vegetable market in Tuan, pausing now and then to examine piles of fresh greens and root vegetables. The sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when a sudden unmistakable scent drifted in from the road beyond Wano's borders, a scent he knew all too well. He froze. "They're back," he muttered under his breath, voice tall, with urgency. Dropping his basket, Charles strode toward the edge of the market. "Everyone, fall in! Battle stations now!" he barked. Within moments, the market fell silent. Traders abandoned their stalls, porters dropped crates. Obedient to Charles's command, they assembled in rough ranks. He did not have to repeat himself. His authority was absolute. On the distant shoreline, ships blew their horns in alarm. A single longboat cut through the gray dawn mist and beached on Wano's shore. Word spread like wildfire. Kozuki Oden had returned to his homeland. The shrill wail of sirens echoed through every corner of Tuan. At the water's edge, a lone figure emerged from the longboat. Clad in battered armor and supported by 2 guards, he climbed the wooden ramp toward the pier. A ragged man, his clothes torn and dirt-stained, stood clutching a heavy crate at the very end of the dock. He stared in disbelief at the newcomer. "Your Majesty, Oden?" the man stammered, voice cracking. Oden paused. A glimmer of recognition crossed his face. "Prince Arjun," he exclaimed. At the sound of his title, Arjun dropped the crate and stumbled forward, tears welling in his eyes. He fell to his knees before Oden, voice choking. "My lord, please, save Wano." "Stand," Oden ordered gently, reaching down to lift him. Arjun allowed himself to be pulled up, still trembling. Around them, once proud samurai and retainers stood gaunt and hollow-eyed, hauling cargo in the docks as if forced into servitude. Odin's brow darkened. "What happened here?" he demanded, voice low but fierce. "Since when have Wano's warriors been reduced to mere stevedores?" Arjun swallowed hard, glancing at the ranks of exhausted men. "Shogun Orochi's grip, it tightened long ago. We've been starved, taxed, and broken, our swords silenced, while outsiders plunder our lands." Odin's gaze hardened at the sight of his battered countrymen. "Then we have no time to lose." He turned to Charles, who was marching toward the pier with a squad of market guards. Charles bowed swiftly. "Your Majesty," he said, "the forces at our gates are ready to advance on Orochi's troops." Odin nodded, sheathing his katana with a solemn click. "Then let us reclaim Wano." As the first rays of sunlight broke over the hills, Wano's fallen samurai straightened their backs. The air crackled with renewed hope. Together, prince, warlord, and loyal retainer, they would drive out the tyrant who had long oppressed their sweet homeland. Armed with fresh urgency, Arjun dropped to one knee before Odin. "Your Highness, there's been an attack!" Odin's eyes snapped open. "You say the black charcoal snake is dead?" Arjun swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Highness. His head, it's been mounted on a pike outside Rabbit Bowl." A hush fell. Odin closed his eyes, leaning on his twin swords. He drew a slow, steady breath. The old resentment he'd harbored against the usurper melted away, replaced by a single, burning resolve. When he opened his eyes again, their ice-cold glare left no doubt. "Rockefeller Charles," he murmured, voice low and lethal, "you'll pay for this." From somewhere beyond the trees came a clear, unwavering voice. "I don't doubt it." The 9 red scabbards assembled silently behind Odin, each ready to fight. Odin himself sheathed one sword, then drew both, a mirror image of steel in his hands. In the clearing ahead, Charles appeared, his cloak fluttering in the wind. He rested a hand on the hilt of the 7-star sword at his hip, boots crunching on the fallen leaves. Odin took a step forward. "I thought once, maybe we could have been friends." Charles offered a faint, regretful smile. "I wish it could have been different." Odin's eyes darkened. "But you burned my lands and murdered my people. You destroyed my home." In one fluid motion, Odin lunged, blades whistling through the air. Charles drew the 7-star sword in response, its 7 notches gleaming like distant stars. The 2 strikes met with a thunderous clang, sparks flying as steel bit into steel. For a heartbeat, they held the clash, breath mingling in the cold air. Then their blades tore free, the shockwave ripping saplings from the forest floor and sending debris skittering in all directions. There, amid swirling leaves and rising dust, Odin and Charles faced one another, rivals bound by blood and betrayal, ready to settle their score in the only language they both understood. A sudden gale swept across the battleground, as if in answer to Kozuki Odin's challenge. Seizing the moment, Charles leapt forward, sword raised high and crackling with Conqueror's Haki. "You wanted spectacle? Here it comes," he shouted, slashing toward Odin in one deadly arc. Odin grinned, drawing both of his blades. A deep red glow flared to life around them. Two-sword style, samurai soul. With that, he charged, ignoring Charles's strike entirely, and unleashed his signature technique, Peach Blossom Torrent. Twin waves of blade energy, each laced with Conqueror's Haki, roared down upon Charles. Clang! Charles met the onslaught head-on, locking his 7-star sword against Odin's crossed blades. Sparks flew as their weapons froze in midair. The 2 warriors glared at each other with unbreakable resolve, and the very heavens quivered. Clouds ripped apart, and overhead the sky seemed to split asunder. In the streets of Tornamaki, the citizens of Wano looked up in horror. "The sky! It's cracking!" someone cried. "The gods are furious!" Panic swept through the crowd as families bolted for home, desperate to find shelter from the wrath that now thundered above. Violent energy crackled around Kozuki Odin and Charles as they stood at the epicenter of the clash. The 9 heroes of Chixiao and the others strained to hold their ground, driving their swords deep into the earth to steady themselves against the shockwaves that threatened to knock them off their feet. "That all you've got? You still crave revenge?" Odin taunted, his voice cutting through the roar of battle. Charles felt a chill surge along his blade. His opponent's strength was undeniable. Disdain flickered in his dark eyes as he spun, unleashing a brutal backhand strike. At his command, the 7-star sutra flared to life, concentric rings of golden light exploding outward to shroud Odin in blinding radiance. With a thunderous boom, the samurai was sent skidding backward, his feet carving deep gouges into the ground, before he regained his footing and lunged forward again. Two-sword style, gun, ghost, Odin bellowed, charging with both swords ablaze in his formidable aura. He came at Charles in a whirlwind of steel. Charles shifted his weight, narrowly evading the first blade, then raised his own sword to meet the second slash. Sparks flew as steel met steel, only to be followed by Charles's sweeping backhand. Odin's eyes flashed. In one fluid motion, he sheathed his left blade and brought the remaining sword across his chest, deflecting the sweep with a resounding clang. Charles thrust his twin blades forward in a single fluid motion. A beam of condensed sword energy shot out and ripped clean through Kazuki Odin's chest. His robe split along a long, jagged slash, exposing the dark Thosap, pulsing aura that coiled around his torso. Odin staggered, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Ha! Quick reflexes, and quite a bit of skill," he admitted, grinning, despite the blood seeping through his torn garment. Without a moment's hesitation, Charles swung both swords in a fierce, overhead arc. The impact sent Odin hurtling backward, crashing across the ground and skidding to a stop dozens of feet away. Charles bore down on Kazuki Odin from every angle. Sheer force and flawless technique combined to overwhelm the legendary swordsman. Though Odin's prowess with blade and weapon demanded Charles's full attention, it was the only thing keeping him in the fight. A hiss of steel filled the air. Charles's next slash came too swiftly for Odin's left arm to evade. The seven-star sword bit deep. Og! Odin's face twisted in agony as raw pain shot up his arm. He stared in shock as the blade severed him, blood spraying from the wound. His left arm was gone, and with it his advantage all but vanished. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each breath a struggle. His chest heaved wildly, his body screaming that it had reached its breaking point. Yet Odin refused to yield. "I'll show you one more layer," he rasped, voice cracking with determination. Charles flipped the seven-star sword in a single fluid motion. Demon sword, body on! A domineering aura swirled around the blade, crackling with red and green lightning. "Go to hell!" Charles roared, and he unleashed the attack. The shockwave that erupted drove back the very air, carrying the force of a true master's strike straight at Odin. Odin's vision blurred, but his spirit blazed. He could feel himself slipping, body failing him, but his heart remained unbroken. Thoughts of his father and of Wano country flooded his mind. "I will accompany you," he vowed silently. His eyes snapped open, sharpened by unyielding resolve. Whatever came next, he would meet it head-on. Charles clenched the Tianyujan between his teeth, Yanmo gripped tightly in his right hand. A ferocious aura, as if the very pits of Shura's purgatory had erupted around him, surged into the sky. "Oda two swords, Taoyuan 10 fist," he roared. A wave of domineering energy wrapped itself around his blade, as Charles lunged forward with the recklessness of a man who'd already embraced death. His sword sliced through flesh and bone on Kazuki Odin's body, but Odin pressed on, blades crossed in deadly defiance. The twin-handled long swords in Odin's hands moved with sky-splitting speed. In a heartbeat, Odin's figure flickered through Charles's guard and reappeared behind him. The duel's outcome seemed sealed. Odin stood, swords forming an X before him. Yet Charles refused to yield. With a fierce twist of his waist, he unleashed another slash. Odin staggered, his legs buckling beneath him. The samurai collapsed, and the Tianyujan snapped free from Charles's clenched teeth, clattering onto the blood-spattered ground. Silence fell. Kazuki Odin lay prone, his right hand still gripping the Yama. Charles's chest heaved as he stared at his fallen opponent. A thin line of blood ran down the side of his face. He lifted his left hand, brushed away the moisture, and stared at his own crimson smear in disbelief. "A dying counterattack?" he whispered, half to himself, half in triumph. "You really nearly pulled it off." Charles spun around at the voice, eyes widening as they fell upon the motionless form behind him. He shook his head, disbelief flickering across his face. Odin had managed to hide one last trick before dying. Pressing forward, Charles knelt beside Kazuki Odin's fallen body and lifted the seven-star sword. Then, with a faint sigh, he paused. "That's enough. He's already dead. Cutting off his head now would feel like an insult. He was a worthy opponent." Steeling himself, he drove the blade down in a clean arc. The sword pierced Odin's heart. Ever since his fateful battle with Kaido 6 years ago, Charles had adopted a single guiding principle: finish your enemy completely. Even if the head remained attached, the heart must be destroyed. No chance of survival, no mercy. Your Highness. The eerie calm that followed Charles's killing blow instantly drew the attention of everyone watching, Caesar and the rest, along with the 9 scabbards of the Flower Capital. When they saw Odin's lifeless body, the scabbards' knees gave out. "Ah, pirate, you monster!" Kinemon roared, brandishing his swords and back, charging straight at Caesar. The other 8 scabbards joined without hesitation, slashing toward the scientist in a furious, coordinated assault. "Wait, hold on," Caesar shrieked, desperation edging his voice. "It wasn't me who killed Odin, it was the boy. Why are you attacking me?" But his plea was drowned out by the clang of steel as Kinemon's blade came down. Caesar staggered, realizing too late that he could not evade blades aimed by warriors driven by grief and rage. Charles staggered under the hail of steel, blood trickling from cracked scales and shallow cuts, but these injuries barely slowed him. His father had already won his battle. Now it was Charles's turn. He fixed his gaze on the 9 warriors arrayed before him. A fierce red glow seared into his eyes. If they refused to defend themselves, he would give them nothing but offense. Let's see who has the strongest resolve and the thickest blood. With a roar, Charles sprang forward. His sword flashed toward the nearest fighter, Kikunojo. In one swift, brutal arc, the blade bit into her shoulder and cleaved her in 2. Her halves collapsed to the ground as the others erupted in furious shouts. Before they could even draw breath, Charles pivoted and lunged at the next target, Kanjuro. The tip of his sword drove clean through Kanjuro's chest. Blood spurted in crimson arcs as Kanjuro crumpled to the earth, helpless and gasping. He was no Kozuki Odin, who might laugh off such a wound. Kanjuro lay unmoving. Kinemon's eyes widened in horror, heart pounding at the sight of his fallen friends. Charles stood amid the chaos, his blades slick with their blood, eyes blazing with an unstoppable fury. In the blink of an eye, 2 more of his brothers lay dead. "Foxfire slash!" Kinemon roared, igniting his twin swords in blazing orange light and hurling them straight at Caesar. But Caesar, calm and unflinching, let the fiery blade strike his chest. With a single fluid motion, he spun on his heel, sweeping the shaft of his guandao into the back of the shadowy warrior who had tried to flank him. The man never even saw it coming. The blade bit deep, and he collapsed in a crimson pool. Caesar didn't pause. Like an unrelenting force of nature, he drove forward in a whirlwind of sweeping arcs and brutal thrusts. In mere moments, Kikunojo, Kankuro, Ashura Doji, Denjiro, Raizo, Kawamatsu, Inuarashi, and Neko Viper all fell beneath his guandao. Each life extinguished with the same cold efficiency. Now only Kinemon remained. He sank to his knees, paralyzed by shock, blood trickling down his own wounds. Before him stood Caesar, a towering figure drenched in gore, friend and foe alike, his weapon still glinting with fresh blood. "You're the last one left," Caesar said, his voice as bone-chilling as a winter wind. "Come down and join your brothers." He raised his guandao high, a grim specter of death on the battlefield, ready to claim his final victim. Most of Kinemon's scales still bore the enemy's wounds, but even those tears were knitting themselves back together before my eyes. He stood alone now, blood seeping through every seam of his armor, as he raised both swords toward Caesar. "So I'm the last one left," he snarled, voice ragged with pain. "Why am I still breathing? But mark my words, before I die, I'll drag you down to hell with me." Caesar didn't answer. The corner of his mouth flicked upward in a grim smile, and then he charged. Metal screeched on metal as Caesar met Kinemon blow for blow, each strike echoing like distant thunder. Kinemon fought like the demon lord of the Red Sky heroes, every parry and riposte a testament to his fearsome skill. For precious minutes they pounded at one another's guard, ignoring defenses, trading mortal wounds in a dance of steel and fire. At last, with one savage upward slash, Caesar severed Kinemon's head. The crimson arc cut through the chaos, and the last of the 9 heroes of the Red Sky collapsed in a spray of fresh blood. But Caesar paid dearly for the victory. His coat was nothing more than smoldering tatters, his hair singed to ash. Burned scars ran along his arms and chest like furious runes. It had been a fight to the death, life for life, wound for wound. Why would Caesar throw himself into such recklessness? Because Charles was watching. He would never let his friend fall without answering every challenge. And even then, Caesar was no ordinary fighter. His devil fruit, an awakening of the mythical beast model, had transformed him into a blue dragon of iron-hard scales and unbreakable bone. His physical defense outmatched that of any mortal warrior, and it was that power, more than any other, that carried him through the flames of battle. When the battle finally subsided and the echoes of clashing steel died away, Caesar appeared at the edge of the clearing. In one gloved hand, he gripped the cropped hair of Kinnamon's head. With a deliberate motion, he hoisted it before him, then let it drop onto the dust-choked earth at Charles's feet. The severed head landed with a sickening thud. A faint spray of blood arced across the dry ground, darkening the soil in a small, crimson pool. Charles stood frozen, his chest tight with shock, eyes fixed on the fallen warrior's face. Around them, the remnants of the battlefield fell silent, as if nature itself recoiled from the brutal display. Caesar straightened, shoulders squared, and met Charles's gaze with an unsettling calm. In that heavy moment, neither man spoke, but the message was undeniable. Their fight was over, and Kinnamon had paid the ultimate price. Chapter 429, Roger's Visit. Father has taken care of everything. Caesar staggered toward Charles, blood seeping through his clothes, but his voice remained calm. Only the exhaustion in his eyes betrayed how badly he'd been hurt. Caesar! Charles rushed to his side. You can't keep rushing headlong into battle like that. Be more careful next time. A weary grin cracked Caesar's lips as he pressed a trembling hand to his side. Understood, he said, but there was no time to linger on Caesar's injuries. Across the land of Wano, a darker wound had just been inflicted, the death of Kozuki Oden. With their daimyo gone, the people's last hope had died alongside him. The Rockefeller pirates had swept through every corner of the country, crushing resistance until few samurai or civilians dared emerge from hiding. Those who did stumbled upon Odin's body in the streets, their tears a bitter testament to a shattered future. Charles had watched the transformation happen almost overnight. Yesterday, Wano's villages thrummed with life. Today, they barely whispered. Farmers fell silent in their rice paddies. Samurai lowered their swords in defeat. Children played only when ordered to, their laughter hollow echoes of a joy now forbidden. Even from a distance, Charles felt the oppressive weight of despair pressing on the land. This was the pattern of a conquered nation. Hope replaced by resignation, courage by obedience. Yet despite witnessing an entire country bend its knee, Charles felt no fear. Instead, a spark kindled in his chest, something stronger than sorrow, sharper than anger. He may have arrived in Wano as an outsider, but now he understood what had to be done. The people of Wano had lost their leader, their hope, and soon they would need a new reason to fight. Charles looked down at Caesar. Rest now, he ordered softly. We'll find a way to turn this around. Caesar nodded, too weary to argue. As he drifted into unconsciousness, Charles steeled himself against the gathering darkness. Wano's soul had been wounded, but it wasn't beyond saving, and Charles intended to be the one to prove it. Charles had spent the past weeks rallying Wano's youth to venture into the rabbit bowl in search of Seastone. Today, Sea Tower Stone was the Rockefeller pirates' most prized asset, far more profitable than any cache of weapons or medicine. Through their underworld connections, they funneled the precious ore to buyers around the globe, the largest single customer being the world government. Charles was well aware of who was financing this trade, but he chose not to intervene, letting the enterprise run its course. With Seastone operations underway, Charles turned his attention to a rumor that had haunted him ever since he first set foot in Wano. A hidden battleship named Pluto, buried somewhere beneath the country's rugged terrain. He combed every valley, every ruined village, only to find that Wano's recent volcanic eruption had unleashed rivers of lava that likely swallowed any trace of the ancient vessel. Exhausted and defeated, he abandoned his search and set sail back to Kame Island, bringing with him only a weathered scroll detailing the old red road markers of Wano country. On board, news of Charles's solitary expedition roused mixed feelings in Caesar. At first, he'd been anxious that his partner was stranded far from their base, but then he reminded himself of the worst part of his own life, his father's daily tirades and temper. As the silhouette of Wano faded behind them, Caesar let out a laugh of pure relief. He stretched his arms wide, eyes shining. Finally, he whispered to the open sea, I'm free. I can do whatever I want from now on. No one can control me. At Caesar's triumphant cry, his body erupted into a colossal dragon. He surged skyward, wings beating against the wind, and the people of Wano trembled at the sight of the malevolent beast circling above them. Meanwhile, Charles had sailed back to Kame Island, where only Barrett remained to oversee their operations. Esdeath and the rest of the crew, however, had already set course for open waters. Though the titanic clash with the Big Mom pirates had drawn to a close, and the personal duel between Charles and Charlotte Linlin was on hold, the broader war between the Rockefeller pirates and Big Mom's forces still raged on. Thankfully, those skirmishes had lost the ferocity of their earlier battles. Now, Esdeath's squad hovered near the Totland Sea, each day waging small-scale fights to seize control of a contested island. Almost daily, they found themselves up against one of the Charlotte family's many children, often at Esdeath's own instigation, as she reveled in boasting about her eldest daughter's prowess. Charles understood her provocations all too well. He had made no move to provoke the Big Mom pirates. Instead, he used the lull to rest, regroup, and expand his crew's strength. With the dawn of Roger's great era only a year away, Charles was determined that when that moment came, his fleet would be more than ready. Chapter 1. Silence on the New World. The Age of Discovery, declared by the pirate king Gol D Roger, had ignited every ambitious pirate's dream. From every corner of the world, crews set sail for the Grand Line, their eyes fixed on the untamed seas of the New World. Rumors of daily skirmishes and legendary treasures spread like wildfire, and Charles Lingling knew he had to be ready. Months passed under an uneasy calm. Word reached him that the Whitebeard pirates were patrolling the eastern waters, their captain and his young son exploring every inlet and bay. Along the western approaches, the Big Mom pirates tested their rivals at every turn, sparking minor clashes wherever their fleets crossed paths. The Rockefeller pirates, by contrast, lay low, ominously quiet after carving out their own domain. Far to the north, the Sky Pirates had subdued nearly the entire first half of the New World. Now, they dedicated themselves to rebuilding their forces, repairing battered ships, and recruiting fresh hands for the battles to come. The Big Mom pirates did the same, fortifying positions and expanding alliances. Meanwhile, Charles watched the Rockefeller fleet's growing strength with concern. To prevent Charlotte's greatest rival, Big Mom herself, from hemming him in, he quietly opened his ranks to a handful of outsiders, bolstering his crew with skilled navigators, brawlers, and spies. Every pirate nation seemed to be stockpiling power for the inevitable storm. By the lunar calendar, it was now 1498, 3 years since the fall of Roger. The sudden disappearance of the Pirate King had hushed the seas. The world held its breath, awaiting the next great upheaval. On this particular evening, Charles did what he had done countless times before. He strolled down to a quiet stretch of sand at the edge of his island stronghold, kicked off his boots, and watched the sun dip beneath the horizon. The sky blazed in oranges and purples, but there was no peace in his heart. Every glittering wave seemed to whisper of the wars yet to come. Suddenly, a distant horn split the air, a deep, resonant sound that carried across the water. Charles's blood ran cold. The New World, he realized, was about to erupt once more, and this time, there would be no turning back. Charles spun around and froze at the sight on the hillside. Gol D Roger? Sure enough, the Pirate King himself stood there, a half-empty goblet of wine in his hand. He tipped it toward Charles and offered a sly, welcoming grin. Charles's heart pounded. Slowly, he climbed the gentle slope to meet him. "How did you get here?" Roger said nothing at first. Instead, he handed Charles the goblet, then leaned back on one elbow and nodded toward the vast sea below. "Come see for yourself," he said, his eyes gleaming. Charles took a cautious sip, brow creasing in confusion. "What do you mean? I thought you were in the South Blue with Shanks, enjoying your final days." Roger laughed softly, the sound carried away by the breeze. "It was dull down there. I needed someone to talk to, so I went walking, and ended up in the New World." They shared a genuine chuckle. Charles gazed out at the horizon, where the sun was melting into the ocean, A comfortable silence fell between them. Finally, Roger turned back to him and asked quietly, "Do you want to know the secrets of this world?" Charles's hand froze midway to his lips. He felt the weight of those words, and the promise of something far greater than either of them could yet imagine. Charles folded his arms and grinned at Roger. "Come on, if I truly didn't want to hear it, I'd just say so, but I won't complain if you decide to tell me." Roger burst into laughter, his head thrown back as if chasing tears from his eyes. Charles shifted uncomfortably under his friend's wild cackling. "You know," Roger said between guffaws, "I just got back from visiting the Whitebeard pirates. Guess what Edward Newgate said when I asked him the same question?" Roger draped an arm around Charles's shoulders, and Charles arched an eyebrow. "He wasn't interested," Roger revealed, wiping his eyes. "Want to guess my reaction?" Charles shook his head and managed a small laugh. "Honestly, I'm not the least bit surprised. Newgate's priority has always been his family. Nothing else matters to him." Roger grinned broadly. "Exactly. Whitebeard only cares about his family." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the sea breeze tugging at their coats. "So," Charles said, breaking the quiet, "what brings you here today?" Roger's expression turned serious. "Do you remember what I told you 2 years ago?" Charles's eyes widened as the memory snapped into focus. "You mean the territory?" Roger nodded. Charles let out a slow breath. "Right, I remember." Roger's words cut through the hush of the cabin. "The Roger pirates have been disbanded," he declared, "and all their territories now fall under your command." As the final syllable faded, Roger fixed Charles with an intense stare, watching for any sign of surprise. The dissolution of the Roger pirates was meant to remain a secret. No one beyond their inner circle knew. Yet here Charles stood, the first outsider to learn the truth. Chapter 430. The Pirate King is arrested. Roger stared at Charles with undisguised amusement, clearly expecting some kind of reaction. When none came, he threw back his head and laughed. "Wow, Charles," he cried, "you really are something else." Charles only frowned. Roger's laughter rang across the deck like rolling thunder, but to Charles it felt strangely flat. All at once, Roger rose to his feet. "I'm entrusting you with our territories in the New World," he announced, voice carrying on the sea breeze. "Use them well." With that, he swept his cloak around his shoulders and strode toward the gangplank. Charles said nothing as he watched Roger's silhouette vanish into the sunset. In the weeks that followed, Roger sent occasional cryptic messages, hints that his own final hour was drawing near, but otherwise kept his counsel. Time moved slowly. A full month passed since Roger's last secret visit before Barrett charged onto the deck one morning, a folded newspaper clutched in his shaking hands. "Captain," he cried, "you'd better see this." Charles took the paper and smoothed it out. His eyes darted across the headline, "Pirate King Gol D Roger arrested by Navy legend Monkey D. Garp. Public execution scheduled in Donghai Town 1 week hence." Charles's breath caught. The era of pirates was shifting beneath his feet. He folded the paper with trembling fingers, heart pounding. The dawn of a new age had arrived, one that would change everything. "Extra! Extra!" he whispered, steeling himself for the storms to come. "The Pirate King has fallen." Chapter X. Roger arrested. The world stood still when the bulletin hit the presses. Pirate King Gol D Roger had been captured. From every corner of the seas to every hideout in the New World, whispers spread like wildfire. On a remote island in the first half of the New World, Shiki the Golden Lion sat in his command chamber, cigar smoke curling around his mane of golden hair. He stared at the newspaper headline, unconvinced. "Roger arrested? Are you certain?" he asked the trembling pirate who dared bring him the news. "It's true, boss," the man stammered, voice cracking. "Marines confirmed it." Shiki scowled. "Don't feed me fairy tales." With a sudden motion, he drew his pistol and fired. The shot tore into the informant's thigh, and the pirate collapsed, clutching his leg and screaming. "Boss, you'll," he wailed, blood seeping between his fingers. Shiki ground his cigar into the ashtray, expression cold as steel. Without a word, he strode toward the hatch. His lieutenant, eyes wide, hurried after him. "Sir, where are you going?" "To find Roger," Shiki replied quietly, "and learn the truth with my own eyes." Before his men could react, he leapt from the deck, jet-powered boots igniting. He shot skyward in a blur of smoke and flame. "Boss!" his crew called after him, stunned into silence. Meanwhile, aboard the Moby Dick, flagship of the Whitebeard pirates, the air was thick with tension. Rumors of Roger's arrest reached every sailor's ears. "Roger arrested?" one crewmate murmured in disbelief. "Roger," another echoed, the name a roar of outrage and fear that swept across the deck, uniting them all in one burning question. How could the Pirate King have fallen? Is this truly the path you've chosen? The old man with the snowy beard, Edward Newgate, gazed at the newspaper in his hand and murmured to himself. He recalled the moment not long ago when the Roger pirates had come knocking. Slowly, Whitebeard lifted his right hand, the wine glass trembling slightly as he pointed it in a single direction. "Farewell, old friend." With that, he drained the remaining wine in one deep swallow and stared off into the distant horizon. "Father!" "What are you talking about?" Charles Lingling's stomach growled so loudly it almost drowned out Katakuri's voice. His mind was consumed by nothing but pastry, freshly baked cakes, fluffy cream puffs, strawberry tarts, so vivid that he hadn't registered the news his son was relaying. That pirate Roger was Capshu, read by Vice Admiral Garp. Didn't everyone say Garp vanished? Katakuri folded his arms, clearly exasperated. "Father, Garp returned to Marine headquarters 6 months ago, and more importantly, Roger's been arrested. As the Big Dad pirates, shouldn't we take some action?" Charles blinked, a half-eaten eclair held in one hand. He peered down at it, then back at his son. "Take action? Like what?" The question hung in the air while crumbs trickled from Charles's lips. Then, as though struck by a brilliant idea, his eyes glittered. "Children," he said at last, a broad grin spreading across his face, "we'll hold a grand celebration. Gather every cake in the bakery, every sweet in the pantry. We'll toast to Roger's capture." At once, Charles's appetite soared. He practically bounded toward the door, eager to summon his crew and commence the festivities. Katakuri, though speechless at the absurdity, knew better than to argue with his father's whims. After all, when Charles Lingling decided on a party, no one could stand in his way. The banquet had already begun. In the great hall, lanterns glowed over long wooden tables heaped with roasted meats and candied fruits. Laughter and the clink of goblets filled the air, until Charles Lingling rose from his seat, his face dark with anger. "That's right, Katakuri," he thundered. "Haven't the Roger pirates been raiding our islands? Tonight, we take them back." "Understood, Dad," Katakuri replied at once, bowing respectfully. A smile flickered across his lips. At last, his father had set a course of action. 1 week earlier, Roger's ship dropped anchor off the shores of the Chambord Islands. A handful of crewmen fished nets out of the hold, others polished brass fittings on deck. Roger himself strode across the sandy beach, scanning the palm-fringed coastline. He hadn't seen his old friend Shanks since they parted ways near the Shampoo Islands. Back then, Roger had clasped Rayleigh's shoulder and shouted over the roar of the sea, "I won't die, brother." After giving that solemn vow, Roger had turned and walked inland, leaving Rayleigh seated on a driftwood log, head bowed in thought. Only the echo of Roger's footsteps remained. Marine Headquarters, Grand Port. A clamorous crowd of naval officers and enlisted men packed the harbor platform, all eyes fixed on the single-masted ship bobbing at the dock. Rumors had spread like wildfire. Pirate King Gol D Roger spotted off the Chambord Isles. Unbelievable. What's he doing here? Bring out Garp. We need Admiral Garp on deck now. Amid the clamoring voices, Roger grinned widely. "Where's Garp? Send that old sea dog out to greet me." A moment later, a figure burst through the main gate, uniform askew, hair wild in the wind. Admiral Garp skidded to a halt before Roger's ship, hand instinctively reaching for his pistol. "Roger, what in heaven's name are you doing here?" Garp barked, eyes flashing with equal parts relief and exasperation. Roger gave a mock bow, his broad smile never wavering. "Garp, my old rival, I've come to surrender. Don't the Marines throw the grandest welcome for a pirate king?" Several Marines snickered, others exchanged awed glances. Admiral Garp simply shook his head, a wry grin tugging at his lips. "You never change, do you?" Roger's chuckle rang out, clear as a bell. And so, in the shadow of Marine headquarters, the Pirate King handed himself over, setting into motion a chain of events that would shake the world to its core. Marshal Sora strode into the hall, flanked by a phalanx of naval admirals, among them the warlord of the Sea Crane, Akainu, and the others. At a curt nod from Sora, the officers closed in on their target. "Gol D Roger," Sora barked. "You're under arrest!" Roger offered no resistance as naval officers restrained him in shackles. As they led him past Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp, Roger paused for a moment and met Garp's gaze. In that instant, the two rivals, whose lives had been intertwined in rivalry and respect, locked eyes. Garp's face remained inscrutable, betraying nothing. Under heavy guard, Roger was escorted through the corridors to the detention block of Navy headquarters. They emerged into the offices of the Fleet Admiral, where Sora wasted no time in delivering the official word. The world government has announced that its hero, Monkey D. Garp, has captured the Pirate King, Gol D. Roger. Sora let his eyes travel over the assembled officers, finally resting on Garp, who still said nothing. Clearing his throat, Sora continued, "The five elders have decreed that Roger's execution will be public. His name carries a formidable reputation across the Grand Line. A public execution will strike terror into the hearts of pirates everywhere and demonstrate the Navy's unrivaled power." With a heavy fist, he struck the table. "Imagine the prestige this will bring to the Navy." A thunderous chorus of agreement rose from the assembled admirals and officers, every face alight with the promise of victory. Only Garp stood apart, his expression unreadable, as the hall echoed with cries of "Yes, sir!" The admirals and senior officers gathered in the Great Hall of Navy headquarters. Admiral Sora cleared his throat and announced, "We've reached a decision. The execution of Gol D. Roger will take place in his hometown, Donghairog Town." A chorus of "Yes, sir!" rolled through the room as the naval commanders rose to stand. Only Vice Admiral Garp remained seated, silent and inscrutable. Sora glanced at him, but said nothing else. When the meeting broke, Garp slipped away without a word. He made his way through the corridors to the high-security prison where Roger was held. Sailors on duty turned to watch the legendary hero approach, awe in their eyes, but Garp paid them no mind. Roger sat in his cell, head bowed. The clink of Garp's boots on the stone floor drew his attention. He lifted his chin and offered the Vice Admiral a faint, knowing smile. "Garp," he said quietly, "there's something you need to hear." Garp folded his arms, expression unreadable. Roger took a deep breath. "My son, he's due any day now." At those words, Garp's jaw tightened. "Don't make demands of me," he warned. Roger's eyes gleamed in the torchlight. Beads of sweat gathered at his temples. "I refuse to let him grow up fatherless," he said, voice firm. "You're the only one I trust to protect Charles." Garp's fists clenched around the bars. "No." "Please," Roger pressed, swallowing hard. "Help me, Garp. I beg you, watch over my child." For a long moment, Garp said nothing. Then, slowly, he stared back at Roger and nodded once, grimly, reluctantly, but with unmistakable resolve. "I'll do it," he said at last, voice low. "I'll keep your son safe." Roger's exhausted relief was all the answer he needed. He sank back onto his cot, a soft smile finally breaking through. In that silent cell, an unspoken promise was made. Come what may, Charles would be Garp's charge. Chapter 431, Golden Lion Shiki's Raid. Roger stared unwaveringly into Garp's eyes. In the dim torchlight, the two foes locked gazes as if neither would blink. Then Garp took 2 cautious steps backward, pain and conflict warring in his expression. "She's in the South China Sea," Roger murmured. Without another word, Garp bowed his head and swept out of the cell. Roger's words echoed in the air. In only a few days, the Navy would execute the Pirate King, Gol D. Roger. But before the admirals could savor their triumph, an alarm pierced the night. Klaxon sirens blared through Marineford's corridors. "Intruder alert!" A shrill roar of surprise followed by a thunderous boom shook the naval base. Explosions lit up the coast. "Enemy forces have landed in the square by the seaside," someone yelled. In an instant, Marineford sent ranks of Marines crashing down. A lookout rushed forward, eyes wide. "How many attackers are there?" He peered into the chaos. "Impossible. There's only one." The lookout's voice trembled. "He's the Golden Lion Shiki, by himself." Under the blanket of night, Golden Lion Shiki stood atop a hillock littered with fallen Marines. Clutched in both hands was his signature deadwood staff, Sakura-ju. From that vantage, he surveyed the smoking ruins of the base and let out a triumphant roar. "How could Roger be captured by a loser like you?" Shiki taunted, his silhouette framed by the flickering flames of destruction. Marineford had fallen, and the Golden Lion had come to free the Pirate King, or claim a prize of his own. Golden Lion Shiki lounged atop a smoldering heap of fallen Marines, cigar smoke curling around his head like a halo. Below him, Warlord Warring States and a fresh wave of naval troops scrambled up the slope, brushing off the bodies as they came. Warring States saluted crisply. "Sir Roger, the Pirate King, has survived his encounter with you." Shiki flicked ash from his cigar, staring down at the crowd with a bored expression. "Pirate King, huh? Big deal. If Roger had ever cared to join forces with me, the world would already be ours." He leaned forward, voice growing cold. "We may not see eye to eye, but Roger and I are of the same age. If he's foolish enough to show up here, bring him to me, and if anyone tries to kill him first, they'll answer to me personally." A fierce grin spread across Shiki's face as he straightened. His execution is set for 1 week from now, in his hometown of Rogertown, East Blue. That's where his legend will end. Warring States nodded solemnly. As the Marines exchanged uneasy glances, heavy footsteps clattered up the makeshift battlefield. Vice Admiral Garp appeared, shoulders broad, face unreadable. "Pirates everywhere will lose their courage when they hear the Pirate King is dead," Garp said, his voice firm. "If Roger's life ends in the weakest sea of all, the East Blue, that news will hit harder than any cannon salvo." Shiki laughed, the sound echoing over the corpses. "The East Blue? You really think we'll carry out an execution in the weakest ocean of the blues? Don't be ridiculous." That would be the final humiliation for this so-called Golden Lion. Shiji's eyes blazed as he rose into the air, chains rattling at his wrists. Right away, Admiral Garp shrugged off his cloak and planted his feet. "Weak or strong, kid," Garp bellowed, "the East Blue stands for peace." Across the yard, Admiral Sengoku dropped his own mantle. Garp cracked his knuckles and snarled, "Don't you dare interfere with this execution." At that, Golden Lion Shiji's fury boiled over. He leapt forward, and in an instant the 3 titans of the Navy collided in the very heart of Marine headquarters. Spectators, every single Marine in the courtyard, froze as rock and steel splintered around them. This was the Navy's most fortified stronghold, yet none remained to defend it except Sengoku and Garp themselves. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, Fleet Admiral Sora and Chief of Staff Tsuru were steaming toward Marijoa. Admirals Sakazuki and Kuzan had already departed for Logatown, in the East Blue, to prepare the execution site. Shiji had chosen his moment perfectly, but his plan unraveled in a matter of hours. 3 days later, half of Marine headquarters lay in ruins. The Golden Lion was defeated, shackled, and hauled away to a maximum security prison. And the very next morning, word of Shiji's downfall exploded across the world, sending shockwaves through every corner of the seas. Chapter 12. The arrest of the 4 legendary pirates across the New World. Every tavern and port was ablaze with gossip. Newspapers flew off the presses, bearing the same impossible headline: 4 legendary pirates, the Pirate Admiral, the Flying Pirate, and Golden Lion Shiki, captured and shackled for impel down. On the front page, a grainy engraving showed Vice Admiral Garp and Fleet Admiral Sengoku sternly escorting the legendary Golden Lion, Shiki, in heavy irons. Below it, stunned captions read, "How could this happen?" Pirate crews everywhere stared at the news in horror. Rumors spread, "Is this the beginning of the end for all pirates?" Many hearts sank at the prospect. First, it was Gol D Roger, the Pirate King. Now Shiki, the Golden Lion, a man who once ruled the skies with his floating fortress. If they could capture Shiki, then who could stand against the Navy's wrath? On Whitebeard's flagship, the aged Edward Newgate stared down at the crumpled paper with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "Old friends are disappearing one by one," he muttered, eyes dark. Still seated at his great oak table, he forced himself to set aside the news and turned a weary, fatherly smile toward the crew bustling about the deck. Far to the east, aboard the Scarlet Fury, Captain Charles folded his own copy of the paper and studied it under the lantern's glow. Around him stood his lieutenants, Barrett, Esdeath, and Caesar, each reacting differently to the shocking announcement. Barrett slammed his fist against the mast. "They actually managed to seize Shiki? That's insane. The Navy must have thrown everything they had at him." Esdeath's voice was calm but cold. "It's reckless for Shiki to challenge the admirals head-on. He knew the risks." Caesar, ever the pessimist, shook his head. "If the same fate could befall Shiki, what hope do the rest of us have? We'd best prepare for a navy on the hunt." Charles closed his eyes, feeling the chatter of his crew fade into the roar of the ocean. He was a young captain, still hungry for freedom and adventure, but news like this tested every pirate's resolve. If the world's strongest were no longer safe, how could he lead his crew in a sea of constant danger? He opened his eyes and met each of his officers in turn. Shiki's fall proves one thing. The Marines won't rest until every pirate is crushed. But we sail under our own flag, and we answer only to ourselves. We'll keep moving, keep fighting, and, when the time is right, show them that our will is stronger than any chain. As the Scarlet Fury's flag snapped in the wind, Charles folded the newspaper and tucked it into his jacket. Around them, the crew readied the decks. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together, and no headline would force them below the waves. Charles Lingling stood at the prow of his flagship and issued his orders with cold precision. Deploy, head for the first half of the New World, seize the Sky Pirates' territory. Anyone who resists is to be eliminated. A hush fell over the deck. Then Charles added in a lower, harsher voice, "No mercy." His crew snapped to attention, their faces hardening. "Yes, Captain." Almost at once, 2/3 of the Rockefeller Pirates' fleet surged forward toward the designated sector. Not far away, the Big Mom pirates, pushed into a corner at New World Central, heard the same command and roared in approval. Big Mom herself clapped her hands with wicked delight. "At last! Children, show Shiji's men no pity and claim his lands for me." Charles cleared the last of his hesitation. "Right away, Mother." Around him, Cracker and the others let out battle cries, their excitement barely contained. News of this mobilization spread like wildfire. Although the Marines had captured 2 of the 4 emperors, 2 still roamed free in the New World. And now the Whitebeard, Rockefeller, and Big Mom fleets were descending upon their rivals. The Big Mom pirates might have suffered recent setbacks, but who in all the seas could rival their ferocity? Charles Ling and Rockefeller Charles had finally reached equal footing in strength. Recognizing each other's power, they both called a temporary ceasefire, only their crews continued to clash. The 2 captains held back their own men, unwilling to escalate the fight any further, at least for now. Even after the fall of the Roger and Sky Pirates, the New World was still fiercely contested by every pirate faction under the sun. In that power vacuum, Rockefeller Charles and the Big Mom pirates had become the chief forces stabilizing the seas. Both sides soon set their sights on Golden Lion Island, each determined to plant their flag and claim it. Rather than drawing swords immediately, they fell into a silent agreement. Whoever raised their standard first would take the island. They never once considered the flying pirates who already garrisoned it. Word of the looming takeover spread like wildfire. Scouts and raiding parties from Rockefeller and Big Mom poured onto Golden Lion, swift and ruthless in their advance. Their greed and speed even caught the attention of the fearsome Whitebeard pirates. "Father, we can't let them seize the advantage," cried out dozens of the Whitebeard crew to their captain, Edward Newgate. "It's time for the Whitebeard pirates to strike." As Whitebeard surveyed the eager young men gathered on the docks, a broad grin spread across his weathered face. "All right, lads, let's weigh anchor. And remember, don't let anyone push you around," he bellowed. With Edward Newgate himself leading the charge, the Whitebeard pirates hoisted their sails and slipped out to sea. On shore, 2 other figures watched the flagship disappear over the horizon and found they could not sit still. Charles Rockefeller and Charles Linlin each rounded up their own crews and launched into the open water. Though 3 separate fleets now plied the same ocean, their captains maintained a silent understanding. Above each ship fluttered a distinct banner, Whitebeard's fearsome Jolly Roger, Rockefeller's gilded seal, and Linlin's crimson emblem, binding them in an unspoken truce as they embarked on their individual voyages. Chapter 432, The End of One Piece. Donghailog town buzzed with anticipation. News had swept through every port that the Pirate King's execution was to take place on this once-forgotten isle, and suddenly every bounty hunter, pirate, and opportunist imaginable had poured in. A flamboyant figure strode into the rusty Anchor Tavern. Don Quixote do Flamingo, draped in a bright pink coat, pointed boots, and dark sunglasses, kicked the door wide and surveyed the crowd with a wicked grin. "Foo-ha-ha! Finally, some excitement," he purred. Inside, the The tavern's patrons, a motley mix of sailors, smugglers, and mercenaries, paused only briefly before returning to their newspapers and wine. Whispers rippled through the room, but most kept their distance. In a corner booth, Dracul Hawkeye's Myhawk lounged with one boot resting on the table, swirling a glass of red wine. Opposite him sat Sir Crocodile, casually flipping through a newspaper, his golden hook tapping the table's edge. At Doflamingo's entrance, Crocodile glanced up, lips curling into a faint, disdainful smirk. "Well, well," he murmured, "the puppet master arrives." Not far off, a towering young man clenched his fists as a fiery gleam burned in his eyes. The thrill of battle radiated from him. "Brother Moria," he called, voice brimming with eagerness. From the tavern's shadows emerged Gecko Moria, his lanky frame draped in darkness and a grin splitting his pale face. Around him, onlookers stirred with excitement, for all knew that when these titans of the New World gathered, the world would never be the same again. The island was crawling with navy ships. "This wasn't the moment for us to strike," whispered his companion. "Relax. I've got a plan," Moria replied, scanning the assembled crowd. From the tavern's doorway, Doflamingo's eyes locked onto the newcomer. Moonlight Moria, captain of the Moria Pirates, one of the hottest names this past year, stood here in person. A slow smile curved Doflamingo's lips. He strolled inside, found an empty stool at the bar, and sat down with his men. "So they've captured Pirate King Roger," he boomed. "What a joke. He barely reigned a year before ending up in chains. Such a waste." A drunkard lurched to his feet, waving a bottle recklessly. "Ha! Better locked up than roaming free. One day soon, I'll claim his head myself." A burly pirate brandished a knife in salute. "Ha!" Laughter rippled through the tavern. "Shanks, stop messing around. How dare these fools mock the king?" In the corner, Charles, formerly Charlotte, felt his cheeks flush with anger. He rose to his feet, determination flashing in his eyes. Shanks glanced over at Bucky, who was huddled against the far wall, and shook his head in exasperation. Around them, the spectators laughed and jeered at the imprisoned captain, their expressions cold as ice. Shanks tugged his straw hat down over his eyes and slipped back into the pressing crowd, but the chill in his gaze didn't go unnoticed. From the edge of the square, a man draped in a green cloak turned sharply, his eyes narrowing at Shanks's sudden disappearance. A week later, a surging mass of villagers, sailors, and marines crowded the town square before the towering execution platform. Word had spread that today the feared pirate king Roger would meet his end, and no one wanted to miss it. The platform itself rose on stout timber beams, draped with crimson banners that fluttered in the morning breeze. The crowd pressed closer, their eager whispers rising to a roar. Atop the platform stood Admiral Warring States, his posture rigid and imperious. He surveyed the assembly, then turned to the line of officers behind him. "Are we ready?" he demanded. A naval general in crisp uniform stepped forward and saluted. "All preparations are complete, Admiral." Warring States checked the timepiece at his wrist, then nodded toward the chained figure at the platform's edge. "Bring him forward. Begin the execution." At once, two executioners in gray-brown uniforms parted the spectators and formed a solemn lee. Their blades glinted in the sun as they escorted Roger, his wrists and ankles bound in iron shackles. With measured steps, the Pirate King approached the center of the scaffold. Each footfall rang out, a steady drumbeat in the charged silence. Dang! Dang! "Is that Pirate King Roger?" A hush fell over the crowd as the shackled figure of Gol Roger shuffled forward. Some stared in disbelief, others in awe. Here was a man who'd conquered the seas, amassed unimaginable riches and power, and yet now he stood condemned, his fate sealed by the very world that once celebrated him. Those earlier jeers at the old regime had given way to a sudden reverence. If even Roger could not escape death, then who was truly untouchable? Mobs surged toward the ornate stone dais at the center of the square, eager to claim their piece of a new monarch's glory. Among them, a young Bucky and Shanks fought back tears. Hidden in the throng, they watched helplessly as the man they idolized was dragged before the scaffold. Clang! The iron gate slammed shut behind Roger, its echo sending shivers through every spine. He was alone now, seated on a low stool, his wrists bound. Two grim-faced executioners stood ready. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the masses. "Hey, Pirate King!" The shout cut through the tense silence. Roger lifted his chin and met the speaker's eyes, his expression unreadable. "Tell me," the voice called again, "where did you hide all the treasure you found? Could it really be, the Grand Line?" A murmur spread as the crowd leaned in. The moment was surreal, the world's greatest pirate, on the verge of death, being questioned about his fabled hoard. Roger paused, a slow, knowing smile creeping across his face. Even here, even now, he held the world's attention, one last time. That legendary treasure, One Piece? The shout rang out across the execution grounds, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Heads turned in unison toward the lone man pointing skyward. On the platform below, the world's most infamous pirate knelt, awaiting his sentence. Gol D Roger raised his head and, without warning, unleashed a booming laugh that echoed against the harbor walls and crackled through every den mushi. Silence fell instantly. "Treasure, you say?" he called out, his eyes alight with mischief. "You can't just bring it up. Don't speak without permission." The two executioners exchanged nervous glances. One swallowed and leveled his blade at Roger's throat. "If it's my fortune you seek," Roger continued calmly, "I'll gladly tell you where to find it. But first, carry out my execution." Behind him, Admiral Sengoku stiffened, realization dawning on his stern features. The Pirate King was making one last proclamation. "I've hidden it all in one place," Roger bellowed, his voice rising over the stunned hush. "Whoever wants it, go claim it!" "Now!" Roger roared. In perfect unison, the executioners lunged. Their blades plunged into Roger's chest, and a spray of blood blossomed against his coat. The crowd gasped, but Roger did not cry out. He gave a quiet, defeated chuckle, bowed his head, and went still. The Pirate King was dead, and with his final words, a legend was born. Everyone in Roguetown froze as if the world had hit the pause button. Then, in an instant, a deafening roar, a tide of cheers washed over the square, shut down the Den Mushi feed. Now! On the Marine flagship, the admirals exchanged stunned glances. They'd never expected Roger to unleash such a bombshell in his final moments, and it was already too late. His words had poured through every video shell, igniting every port and city with news of the One Piece. In Roguetown itself, hands shot into the air. Some cheered for the Pirate King's death. Others cheered for the great treasure he'd sworn to reveal. Across the world, one question thundered louder than cannon fire. Is this what Roger risked his life for? At Rosie's Cantina, Silver's Rayleigh sat before the bar, head bowed, a half-empty wineglass quivering in his hand. A single tear slipped down his cheek. Opposite him, Shaq methodically polished glasses, her gaze fixed on him in solemn silence. Roger's dying proclamation, "Seek the One Piece and claim the legacy," resounded in the hearts of dreamers everywhere. In every corner of the Grand Line, pirates like Doflamingo, Moria, and Crocodile curled their lips into eager smiles. The currents of fate had shifted. A new era surged forward. Someone in the crowd stamped their foot. "Set sail! Find the One Piece!" As if struck by a signal, the entire harbor exploded into motion. Boots pounded on cobblestones, carts rattled across the docks, and every ship's bell rang out. The world had heard the call, and it would answer by storming the seas. The age of piracy had truly begun. Fleet after fleet set sail across the horizon, heralding a new era of exploration. Through Roger's ultimate sacrifice, the age of discovery had finally begun. Chapter 433, He's a Member of the Marines. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, permission to pursue and eliminate the pirates hiding on this island. Vice Admiral Sakazuki's voice cut through the uproar in the plaza as he glared at the panicked crowds. Still recovering from the shock of the recent crisis, Sengoku took a measured breath. A cold glint flashed in his eyes. "Very well. Seize every pirate on this island." Admiral Kuzan, Sakazuki, and the assembled Marine officers snapped to attention. "Aye, sir." In that instant, the course of history shifted. The sudden arrival of Charles Rockefeller had already thrown both pirates and Marines into turmoil. His presence alone was enough to send ripples of uncertainty through every faction. Now, with Sengoku's orders, events careened in yet another unexpected direction. Before the officers could move, a lookout's shout rang out. "They're heading for the port. Blockades in place." All eyes darted to the waterfront. From the dock, a pirate let loose a sneer. "Trash like you belongs at the bottom of the sea." At those words, Sakazuki's entire frame seemed to glow with molten fury. The air around him shimmered as he strode forward, heat waves rolling off his skin. His gaze, burning like coals, pinned the fleeing pirates in their tracks. "Stand down!" cried one of the junior officers, yet his voice wavered as he took in the sight of Sakazuki in full fury. "That's Vice Admiral Sakazuki, the Red Dog, one of the Navy's 3 monster vice admirals." At the mere mention of his fearsome title, the would-be escapees froze, terror overtaking them in the face of the living inferno that now blocked their path. At this stage in the New World, Sakazuki still had no real reputation, no single clash to his name that anyone could point to. He wasn't even as notorious as Kuzan. Yet if he'd shown up back in the first half of the Grand Line, pirates would have quailed at the very mention of him. A one-on-one with Sakazuki, you wouldn't last a heartbeat. "Lava Fist!" Sakazuki roared. Without a second thought for the civilians caught in the streets, he drove a molten hand through the crowd as though they were nothing more than reeds. The torrent of blazing rock tore through the masses with brutal efficiency. Kuzan's eyes narrowed. "Sakazuki, you're hitting innocents." Sakazuki paused, lava dripping from his knuckles, and offered Kuzan a cold, humorless smile. "I'd rather snuff out 1,000 lives by mistake than let a single criminal walk free." For a moment, Kuzan stood frozen at the edge of the devastation. Then, as Sakazuki turned and began to advance again, every armed rebel in his path fell before him. Around them, naval admirals and enlisted men surged forward, cutting down anyone who raised a weapon. Kuzan fell into line without a word, moving in grim silence as Sakazuki's ruthless assault pressed on. 2 thorn spears. With a graceful flick of his wrist, the first spear whipped through the air. The second followed instantly. A would-be pirate assassin, lunging with a knife, barely had time to register the attack before both barbed spears found their mark. He collapsed to the cobblestones, blood darkening his shirt. "Fua!" Don Quixote do Flamingo strode forward, surveying the carnage at his feet. His pink coat flared behind him like twin wings. "It looks like the Marines are moving in to trap every last one of them. How about we join forces and clean up the mess in one go?" He turned to gauge the reactions of his allies. Crocodile, cigar clenched between his teeth, offered nothing but a cold, disdainful glance. In the next instant, the very air around him shimmered. His form dissolved into a swirl of golden sand that drifted silently down the street. Clearly, there was no threat close enough to capture his interest. Doflamingo's smile faltered only momentarily before he shifted his gaze to Dracul Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman. Clad in black and razor-sharp of eye, Mihawk advanced without a word. Each time an enemy came within reach, he flicked out his black blade, and the unfortunate all fell cut down without ceremony. Doflamingo turned at last to the lone figure cloaked in shadows beside him. The man stood perfectly still, until in the blink of an eye he was gone. No swirl of sand, no puff of smoke, the cloak dropped empty to the ground. Doflamingo's confident grin vanished. His pupils contracted as he spun in place, searching for the vanished man. But there was nothing, no sign of his ally or his foe. The street lay empty, save for the echoes of battle and the soft rustle of an abandoned cloak. Doflamingo stared at Moria, who was already flanked by a dozen of his younger subordinates. "Well, want to join forces and fight your way out?" he asked, voice twisted with reluctance. Moria flashed a mocking grin. "Heh, I never team up with the weak." With that, he turned on his heel and strode down toward the docks, his crew close behind. Doflamingo watched his retreating back, lips curling in silent fury. "Foo-foo-foo, that's right," he snarled under his breath. "Never ally with the weak." His chest tightened with barely suppressed rage. "Dover, move out," he ordered Dover, the nearest officer. "Don't let the Navy finish their blockade." Diamante, standing beside him, chuckled. "Yes, sir. Foo-foo-foo, let's go." In an instant, Doflamingo's stormy rage settled back into his usual calm. He led the way toward the port, his footsteps brisk and confident, as if he weren't leaving a trail of ruin in his wake. Behind them lay the shredded remains of the last Marine patrol, torn apart so thoroughly that even Diamante averted her gaze. A short way off, hidden in the shadow of a narrow alley, 2 other figures stood apart from the chaos. Shanks, red-haired and easygoing, glanced at his companion, Bucky. "Come sail with me," he invited quietly. His voice was earnest, hopeful. Bucky looked back at him, startled by the sudden offer, but after a long moment, he shook his head. "I'm not your subordinate," he snapped. "Don't be ridiculous." Shanks simply smiled, undeterred. They stood there in silence for a heartbeat longer before footsteps echoed around the corner, and the promise of another battle called them both back into the fray. Charles slammed his fist against the wall. "I'm going to form my own pirate crew." Shanks's hand shot out to steady him. "Charles." "No," Charles interrupted, eyes blazing. "I appreciate everything you've done for me, but my path isn't under your flag. I have to strike out on my own." Without waiting for another word, he yanked free from Shanks's grip and tore down the alley. "Charles!" Shanks called after him, but the boy had already vanished into the bustling port. Shanks pressed a hand to the brim of his straw hat, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then he tucked the brim down over his eyes and walked out into the sunlight. "Looks like I'll be sailing solo, too," he murmured. Later that afternoon, Charles crept through a throng of Marines, a throwing knife gripped in his hand. He scanned the chaotic scene around him, armed officers moving purposefully, shouting civilians scrambling for cover. "Why are there so many Marines here?" he muttered, ducking behind a barrel. Suddenly, a discordant, lilting laugh cut through the clamor. The voice sent a chill racing down Charles's spine. He'd heard it countless times during his years aboard the Roger pirates. Slowly, he turned toward the sound, every muscle tensing. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Heavy footsteps approached, parting the crowd like a ship slicing through water. A tall figure, cloaked in a long black coat, strode forward, his ice-blue hair glinting in the sun. When he reached Charles, he stopped and studied the red-nosed boy with a smirk. "La la la! Is that the kid who served as cabin boy on the Roger pirates?" the man asked, cocking an eyebrow. "What in the world are you doing here, alone among all these Marines?" Charles swallowed hard, the knife feeling suddenly heavier in his palm. The stranger's eyes gleamed. This was no friendly reunion, and somewhere in the crowd, reinforcements were closing in. "I remember he was supposed to be a red-haired boy trailing you. Where is he?" Kuzan's eyes widened when Bucky's nose flushed scarlet. "What? You're with the Roger pirates, the crew of the Pirate King?" At once, the crowd surrounding them fell silent, as if Bucky had just confessed to a dreadful crime. His arms shook so violently that the metal orb in his hands rattled. Swallowing hard, he met Kuzan's gaze. "Yes, it's true. I'm a member of the Roger pirates, the Pirate King's own crew." Bucky's voice rang out in grim acceptance. He knew that, against someone like Kuzan, his odds of survival were virtually nil. As soon as he spoke, every face in the gathering, seasoned pirates and hopeful seafarers alike, lit up with greed and excitement. "Aha! We'll make our fortune yet. He can lead us right to the One Piece." Kuzan allowed himself a faint, frosty smile, condensing the air around his hands into an ice-like chill. Bucky braced for the worst, certain the execution order would follow. But before Kuzan could move, a booming cheer erupted from the back of the crowd. "Seize him! He's the key to finding the One Piece." No one knew who shouted, but at once the mob surged forward, eyes glittering with avarice. "Capture the traitor before the Navy gets here," they cried. In that instant, Bucky realized he was caught between two unstoppable forces, one promising glory, the other death. "I'd be happy to help with a full rewrite. Please paste the complete chapter here, and I'll transform it into a polished, coherent English version, renaming Charlotte to Charles and ensuring he's consistently portrayed as a boy." Chapter 434, Dragonclaw. A swarm of fierce-looking pirates charged at Kuzan, knives glinting in the dim light. At the same moment, another group swept in, hoisted Charles onto their shoulders, and dashed toward the dock. Charles froze, his boots lifting slightly off the deck as he glanced around in bewilderment. He peered at the men surrounding him, ragged, bloodied, yet fiercely determined. Who are you?" he stammered. A gruff voice answered him. "We're the crew of the One Piece." At the shout, dozens more fighters, pirates who'd previously been beaten back by the Navy and left leaderless, rallied to Charles's side, forming a protective shield around him. Where the Navy had expected a rout, they found organized resistance instead. Kuzan, momentarily distracted by the sudden surge of fighters, watched the scene with narrowed eyes. Charles was already being carried away. "Foolish," Kuzan muttered under his breath. With a snap of his fingers, he unleashed a flurry of frost-laden strikes at the pirates closing in on him. "Damn it!" one of the pirate captains cursed as he fended off Kuzan's chilling assault. All around, The Navy tightened their circle, preparing to close in on Kuzan. Even Crocodile, who had once faced down powerful enemies with cold arrogance, now grimaced under the pressure of the encroaching soldiers, blocking blows from every direction. But the pirates had their prize. Charles was on the move, carried by loyal hands toward the safety of the waiting ships. Behind him, chaos erupted on the plaza as Navy and pirate clashed in a storm of steel and ice. And amid it all, one question burned in Charles's mind. How had he inspired such fierce loyalty in these desperate souls? Whatever the answer, his escape was underway, and with it, a new chapter in his hunt for the ultimate treasure would begin. The port was still miles away when Crocodile's expression suddenly darkened. Off in the distance, a swarm of pirate ships was converging. Reinforcements for the Pirate King, no doubt. Too late to turn back now. Before he could collect his thoughts, the Navy closed in, hemming him in on all sides. Crocodile turned, stalking toward the nearest cluster of pirate vessels. With a sharp exhalation, he unleashed a volley of jagged sand blades. They sliced through the surrounding sailors in an instant. "Pirate scum! You're surrounded!" snarled Vice Admiral Dalbers, stepping forward. Two more vice admirals flanked him, their blades gleaming in the afternoon sun. Crocodile glared around, then barked an order. "Fall back! Regroup in the opposite direction!" Across the battlefield, Doflamingo stumbled, panic flashing in his eyes. His signature pink coat was torn and bloodied from earlier skirmishes. He darted toward a weak point in the Navy lines, his grin wild. "Heh! Children! This way! Move!" Moria, meanwhile, realized that every moment he stayed meant more of his crew would be slaughtered or captured. His hollow-eyed followers hesitated only a second before he shouted, "Retreat! Pull back to the rear!" As cannon fire thundered and chaos erupted all around, an unexpected shift rippled through the fray. Something was changing the balance of the battle. Charles pressed forward through the chaos, his allies forming a protective ring around him as he crept toward the port. The scattered naval forces, still reeling from the initial pirate onslaught, struggled to regroup and were being picked off one by one. "Pirates! Don't even think about running!" snarled Admiral Sakaski from the edge of the battle. Sakaski's eyes flicked to Charles when he saw him break through to the center of the enemy line. In the Admiral's mind, the real threat wasn't the rank-and-file buccaneers, but the red-nosed clown known as Crocodile. Eliminate him, Sakaski reasoned, and the rest would collapse in panic. Just then, Charles's voice rang out. "Desert Sword!" A frigid whisper carried on the wind, and in the next instant a blade of swirling sand materialized, slicing cleanly through Sakaski's midsection. The Admiral staggered, crimson seeping through his uniform, as Crocodile advanced with cold amusement. "Ha-ha! Quick on the draw, aren't we?" Crocodile taunted, lighting a fresh cigar and exhaling a plume of smoke. He strolled forward, all swagger and menace. Sakaski's wound knit itself back together in molten rivulets, magma surging beneath his skin. He glared at his rival. "Crocodile, your reign of terror ends now." The pirate lord only sneered. "Is that so?" Without hesitation, Sakaski clenched his magma-infused fist and charged, determination blazing in his eyes. Above the din of clashing steel and roaring cannons, Charles braced himself, ready for whatever the next moment might bring. He's Crocodile, the man who once challenged Whitebeard and lived. Why is he here too? A ripple of recognition swept through the pirate ranks. Even Crocodile's defending the Straw Hats. Men, rally and protect their crew. Let's fight our way out of here. "Yeah," came the thunderous response, echoing across the island. Meanwhile, on the far side, a cloaked figure stood alone. "Doflamingo, come back with me, and the Navy can pretend none of this ever happened." Sengoku, who had vanished from the battlefield, stepped out of the shadows to confront him. "Pretend? You can't go back now. Even if the Navy looks the other way, what about the world government?" From beneath the cloak came Doflamingo's cold voice. "Must it end this way? We had high hopes for you." Sengoku's eyes narrowed. He clenched his fists. "I'm taking a different path." Doflamingo chuckled softly. "Then it seems we're at an impasse." With a heavy sigh, Sengoku's arms began to glow as he channeled his Busoshoku Haki. "Very well. Come with me. To impel down." In an instant, Sengoku leapt forward, roaring, "Dragon Claw!" Doflamingo's right hand twisted into a jagged, bird-like beak and slammed into Sengoku's Haki-imbued fist. The impact rang out like a cannon blast. The ground trembled as shockwaves from their battle sent nearby roof tiles skittering across the courtyard. Sengoku's voice boomed like thunder. "So you haven't wasted these years after all." With a roar, he closed the distance and slammed a palm into Dorag's chest. Both men flew back, skidding 3 paces before scrambling to their feet. Dorag's eyes burned. "Sengoku, you can't stop me." As Sengoku's cloak whipped away, Dorag caught sight of his old mentor's face, and 1,000 memories flooded back. Years ago, the Navy had hailed Garp's son as the next fleet admiral in training. Sengoku had sat by Dorag's side at every strategic briefing, taking careful notes. Admiral Hildy had managed their operations. And then, after Dorag's sudden reassignment to marry Joa, everything changed. Dorag had his suspicions, but dared not speak them aloud. Now their duel raged in an alley behind Ragi Town, each strike echoing off the narrow stone walls. Sengoku grunted, swiping sweat from his brow. "Ugh, you're stronger than I remembered." Before Dorag could respond, another figure burst through the last cluster of stumbling pirates. Admiral Kuzan's voice cut the air like ice. "I won't let you slip away." He raised his arm, and brilliant frost exploded outward in an instant. A wave of frigid air swept through the harbor, coating the docks and rigging in a thin layer of ice. The pirates, shrieking in panic, abandoned their posts and converged on the waiting launch, cradling Bucky, still unconscious, in their arms. Dorag's heart sank as he watched them scramble aboard. Sengoku darted forward, but Kuzan's frozen fingers had already reached for the ship's gangplank. "Not good," Sengoku muttered. The two admirals halted, glaring at each other across the icy gap. The rescue of Bucky and the truth behind Dorag's exile hung in the balance. Chapter revision. The sea is freezing over. A wave of panic rippled through everyone who witnessed the sudden drop in temperature. Cracks of ice began snaking across the water's surface as the crew struggled to keep their footing. Then, slicing through the air, a brilliant beam of emerald light blazed down from above, cleaving the chill into retreat. On deck, Kuzan lifted his head and stared. "Hunter of the Navy, Jorakal Mahawk." Mahawk stood on the prow of a small skiff, unsheathing his ebony-handled knife with a single smooth motion, then sheathing it again just as swiftly. His eyes, sharp and cold as a hawk's, scanned the frozen expanse. A hush fell over the pirates aboard Kuzan's vessel. None dared approach the man known throughout the early Grand Line. Word had spread ever since Mihawk had challenged and been acknowledged by Charles Rockefeller, the world's greatest swordsman. Their legendary duel at Whiskey Peak, the Grand Line's gateway, had been witnessed by countless sailors and bounty hunters. In just a few short hours, Mihawk's name had shot to prominence, carried on every wind from Reverse Mountain to Drum Island. Now he stood before them, a silent threat in human form. Even the howling wind seemed to falter under the weight of his reputation. Kuzan's icy smile hardened as he readied himself for whatever came next. The frozen sea might obey his command, but in the presence of Jorakal Mahawk, no one could be sure which blade would strike first. Chapter 435. Chaos in Ragi Town. Who is this? Bucky, still ringed by his men's protective circle, stared in astonishment at the young man in the black hat standing at the bow of their pirate ship. Only moments ago, they'd been staring down Vice Admiral Aoki Kuzan's fleet, and now, inexplicably, they were flanked by scores of eager pirates instead. He took a steadying breath and scanned the sea of grim, determined faces around him. Every pirate there glared toward the looming Navy vessels, eyes blazing with defiance. "Lord Bucky, what are our orders?" a lieutenant blurted out, urgency cracking his voice. Bucky's heart hammered as dozens of expectant eyes fell on him. His legs shook under their scrutiny, but he forced himself calm. He stepped forward, raised his voice, and pointed at the young man in the black hat, Charles. "Men, follow Charles. Break through their blockade." At his command, the taut silence shattered. A thunderous cheer rose from the pirates, swords were drawn, and blunderbusses were raised. United behind Charles, they surged forward, determination written on every face, ready to charge into the heart of the Navy's trap. Break through the naval blockade, kill them. Follow Lord Charles, smash their formation. Master Charles is amazing, surrounded by naval vessels, yet he still commands the Luoding. He'll be the next pirate king. At that moment, Charles's stature seemed to tower over every pirate aboard the merchant ship. Their shouts echoed up the rigging as they rallied to his banner. Off to one side, Dracul Mihawk watched in silence, his sharp eyes alternating between Admiral Kuzan, known as Aokiji, poised to strike at any moment, and the swelling tide of pirate fervor. "Interesting," he murmured. He turned toward the red-nosed clown who led the cheers. "The One Piece crew?" he asked, intrigued by their sudden unity. Aokiji frowned, assessing the newly emboldened pirates. Completely unexpected, he admitted. Admiral Kuzan had already marked Charles as his greatest adversary. This young man wielded the uncanny power to rally every pirate on the seas. Hundreds, no thousands, circled him now in fierce loyalty. And yet, not one of them, and certainly not Aokiji, had the faintest idea what Charles was thinking at that precise instant. Charles screamed, "Assholes! Why aren't you moving? How long do I have to keep this up? Come on, get the ship underway." A cold sweat beaded on his forehead as he kept stealing glances at the marine ranks lined up along the pier. "Shanks, where are you when I need you?" he thought, his heart pounding so hard he felt it might burst. He blinked back tears of frustration, then a jet of sand exploded from the deck beside him. He coughed violently, grit and blood spraying his lips. Standing through it all, Crocodile refused to drop the smoldering cigar clenched between his teeth. Scorch marks crisscrossed his coat, and bruises colored his face, but he glared defiantly at his crew. "What are you waiting for?" Crocodile roared. "Stop gawking and cast off at once." Before another soul on the ship could move, Admiral Sakazuki strode onto the dock. His uniform was ripped to shreds, but his cold glare remained intact. "What's taking so long? Why isn't the attack underway?" he demanded. Beside him, Admiral Aokiji stood silent, his frost-touched stare fixed on Dracul Mihawk, the legendary swordsman leaning against the stern rail, his enormous blade resting casually at his side. Sakazuki followed Aokiji's gaze and blinked. "A Navy hunter," he snarled under his breath. "How bold." In an instant, Sakazuki's fist ignited in molten heat. He thrust it forward, magma roaring through the air. Mihawk's hawk-like eyes narrowed in surprise as the fiery blow closed in. He slashed his blade with both hands, and a brilliant wave of emerald sword energy tore through the air. At the same moment, Sokolsky thrust both arms forward, molten magma coalescing into twin fiery fists, and the two powers collided with a thunderous clang. Sparks and steam exploded where blade met magma. Sokolsky's eyes narrowed. There was something achingly familiar about that sword aura. A single image flashed in his mind, a lone figure standing proud behind an impossibly long blade. He paused, lowering his magma fists just enough to speak. "What's your connection to Charles Rockefeller?" he demanded, voice low but dangerously calm. Instantly, every pirate in the chamber snapped their gaze to Jorakal Mihawk. The legendary swordsman stood motionless, his black blade tilted at a slight angle so that the torchlight danced along its edge. He met Sokolsky's stare without flinching. "It's what I've been hunting my entire life," he replied, voice carrying clearly through the hush. At those words, a ripple of astonishment swept the room. Whispers rose. The greatest swordsman in the world, admitting he'd been seeking this Charles Rockefeller? It was inconceivable. One by one, skeptical jaws dropped, eyes widening. Even Sokolsky's magma-charged arms wavered. He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "The greatest swordsman in the world," he scoffed. "What a joke." But Sokolsky regained his composure almost at once. He raised his arms overhead, magma coursing faster, blazing hotter. "Meteor volcano," he bellowed. In an instant, dozens of incandescent fists shot upward in unison, bursting through the ceiling's opening like red-hot comets. The pirates stared, slack-jawed and confused. Why fire at the sky? As the first molten fist began its descent, every pair of eyes remained glued to that surreal display, hearts pounding with anticipation. Magma dripped from the sky in molten droplets, and a chorus of alarmed shouts rose from the deck. "No, lava is falling." Pirates scrambled for cover, panic writ across their faces. Crocodile rose to his feet, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Humph, all this fuss over a little lava?" With a sharp motion of his hand, he summoned a colossal sandstorm that spiraled upward. The howling winds whipped the sea into a froth. "Get the ship moving, now!" someone yelled, understanding Crocodile's plan. The crew leapt into action, hoisting the sails to catch the gale. The vessel surged away from the dock just as the scorching magma plummeted into open water. Each thunderous splash only accelerated the ship's flight. On the horizon, Sakazuki frowned in frustration. He glanced at Aokiji, who stood calmly beside him. Aokiji merely shrugged and pointed at the sea ahead. A vast swath of ocean was split in two. One side lay frozen solid, the other rolled in dark waves. It was the aftermath of Sakazuki's own assault. Aokiji had tried to freeze the water to assist him, only for Mihawk's blade to sever the frost. Now, seeing the fractured surface, Sakazuki's fiery aura flashed even hotter. "Send word to Navy headquarters," Sakazuki barked over his shoulder as he strode toward the town. "Clown Bucky and the One Piece crew have led a mass breakout from Rogue Town. Issue bounties at once." Though most of the pirates had fled aboard Bucky's ship, a handful still skulked among the alleys of Rogue Town and the surrounding countryside. Sakazuki didn't bother turning back. "Farewell, Sengoku," Dolag called out from the pier, his eyes fixed on the emptying harbor. "If we meet again, we'll settle the score properly." A sudden gust of wind whipped around him, and in an instant he vanished from sight. "Devil fruit ability," Sakazuki murmured, frowning thoughtfully. With the battle won, the Navy rounded up everyone in town. Pirates or not, any civilian unable to prove their identity was marched straight to Impel Down. Amid the confusion, though, dozens slipped through the cordon and vanished into the night. Farther out at sea, a small rowboat cut through the dark waters. Inside, Doflamingo sat silent, Moonlight Moria poling steadily, and at the stern, red-haired Shanks gripped the oars. As Rogue Town's flickering lanterns receded into the distance, Shanks leaned forward, his voice fierce in the hush. "I will see the captain's wish fulfilled, no matter the cost." Chapter 436, The Navy's Next Strategy. Marine Headquarters, Marineford. Admiral Sengoku had just returned alongside Admirals Akainu, Aokiji, and the other senior officers, yet each of their faces was clouded with concern. A young messenger hurried forward, saluted Sengoku, and reported in a tense voice, "Admiral, the Fleet Admiral requests your presence in his office immediately." Sengoku inclined his head. "Understood. Let's go, everyone. We'll report to the Fleet Admiral." With Akainu and Aokiji flanking him, Sengoku made his way to the Fleet Admiral's chamber. He knocked firmly, and a deep baritone called out, "Enter." Pushing the door open, Sengoku stepped inside, and was struck by the room's oppressive silence. Fleet Admiral Sora sat at his desk, his expression grave. Around him sat Vice Admiral Zephyr, Vice Admiral Garp, Admiral Kizaru, freshly returned from the Navy's scientific division, and other high-ranking officers, all motionless and watchful. Never before had the Rockefeller pirates and Charles Rockefeller's sudden assault on Punk Hassad sent so many alarms through the world government. After the raiders vanished with their spoils, the Marines had scrambled to secure the area, even dispatching CP-0's elite to establish a forward garrison. Now that Sora had summoned them, it was clear. The Navy's next move had to be decisive, and time was running short. Admiral Kizaru stood at the head of the long conference table in Marine headquarters, his cool gaze sweeping over the assembled officers. With CP Nero's top agents dispatched relentlessly in pursuit of the Roger pirates, their ranks had been stretched to breaking point. In desperation, the Cypherpole's scientific detachment had been folded into the Navy's command, and this garrison duty at Logatown had fallen squarely to Kizaru. Just then, the doors swung open and Fleet Admiral Sengoku strode in, flanked by a phalanx of generals. "Marshal!" Sengoku barked, snapping to attention. One by one, the other admirals saluted. "At ease," Admiral Kong, the Navy's commander-in-chief, said, waving them down. As the room relaxed, he turned to Sengoku. "Fleet Admiral, you may sit. Now, brief us on the situation in Logatown." With a nod, Sengoku settled into his chair and cleared his throat. The room already knew the broad strokes of what had happened. Roger's execution, the tremor it had sent through the Grand Line, the outbreak of violence that followed. But the finer details, what had transpired after their vidphone link went dark, remained a mystery to everyone but Sengoku himself. "Sir," Sengoku began, "here is everything we've uncovered in Logatown." He recounted Captain Gol D Roger's final moments, how the Pirate King had laughed in the face of death, how he'd cried out one last riddle about a treasure beyond imagining, and how, with those words, he'd sealed his own legend. As Sengoku spoke, the admirals leaned forward. When he reached Roger's dying declaration, a hush fell over the chamber. Admiral Kong's jaw tightened. Vice Admiral Tsuru exchanged a glance with Commodore Smoker. All around the table, men and women who held the Navy's highest ranks frowned at the memory of that final world-shaking cry. Sengoku fell silent, letting the weight of Roger's last words hang in the air. Outside the conference room, the Navy prepared to move on a revelation that might just change the balance of power in the world forever. I sat in the marshal's chair, frowning as Roger the Pirate King's last words echoed in my mind. His threat wasn't idle. He planned to wait until the Warring States period ended, then strike with all his fury. The War Council fell silent, the weight of his promise hanging over us. After a long pause, Commander Crane rose. "Marshal Charles, we've just received the latest intelligence from the Four Seas. The situation is far worse than we feared." He laid the dispatch on the table before me. I opened it, and my heart sank. I had guessed at the scale of the threat, but the truth was even more dire. Has the world really descended into this level of chaos? I murmured. Admiral Kong exchanged a troubled look with Commander He. "Yes, sir. Pirate activity far exceeds our previous estimates, and there are entire regions we haven't even surveyed yet." "Don't hesitate. Dispatch the fleet," Crane ordered. I let my head fall back against the chair, exhaustion pulling at me. Hunt pirates, sink pirate ships, then do it again, over and over. The endless cycle of violence weighed heavily on my shoulders. Commander Crane placed a firm hand on my arm. "Marshal, you can't give in to despair. The Navy needs your leadership now more than ever." I drew in a steadying breath and closed my eyes. His words were right. Despite the fatigue, I had to steel myself for the trials ahead. The world was falling apart, and only the Navy stood between it and total collapse. Sora pinched the bridge of his nose with one hand and pushed the thick dossier across the conference table. "Here, take a look at these reports. If anyone has ideas, speak up. The Navy is facing its most dangerous hour." He spoke with such quiet urgency that even General Waring, who had commanded naval forces for 30 years, felt a knot tighten in his chest. Waring slid the file toward Admiral Zephyr, who glanced at Marshal Sengoku with alarm. "Marshal," Waring began, his voice low but urgent, "according to these figures, the Navy is at a true life-and-death crossroads. We must—" "Hold on," Sora interrupted, rubbing his temples. "Let's hear everyone out before we debate next steps." Waring bristled but fell silent. Around the table, the other admirals and generals leaned forward, eyes fixed on the pages before them. One by one, they read through the intelligence briefings, their faces growing pale as the full scope of the crisis became clear. Only when the last officer lowered his document did the room erupt in murmurs. Every man and woman there understood the stakes. If they failed to act decisively, the Navy, and perhaps the entire realm, might not survive what was coming. Sora flipped the dossier closed and looked around at his officers. "All right," he said, "we've seen the numbers. Now let's hear your thoughts." Admiral Kong slumped against the table. "Marshal," he began in a low voice, "we have to stop this momentum before it's too late. If we don't, the world will descend into chaos." The Warring States general straightened, his armor clinking softly. "Exactly. We cannot tolerate disorder. I propose we order the entire Navy to concentrate its forces at the mouth of the Grand Waterway and crush these pirates before they spread farther." Admiral Akainu's eyes flashed with resolve. A palpable aura of lethal intent surrounded him. Even Vice Admiral Ching Pheasant remained silent, shocked into agreement by the staggering figures in the dossier. In just days, thousands had slipped into piracy. If they did not strike now, the damned scourge would only grow bolder. But Sora shook his head firmly. "No, we don't have the manpower to seal off the Grand Waterway entirely. And what of the Yonko in the New World? They're watching our every move, waiting to pounce if we overextend. Besides, will the world's governments actually back such a bold blockade? Public opinion already wavers." A tense hush fell over the room. Sora's expression was stern, but his voice was measured. Sure, deploying a massive fleet at the waterway's entrance might scare off some would-be pirates, but it won't stop those who've already set sail. We need a strategy that hits them where they're most vulnerable, before they ever raise their Jolly Roger. He paused, letting his words sink in. Rushing in with all guns blazing invites disaster and gives our enemies just the excuse they need. We must be smarter than that. Kong rubbed his temples, his fatigue plain. "Then what do you suggest, Marshal?" Sora opened the folder again, smoothing the pages with a decisive gesture. We split our forces. A small, highly mobile squadron will patrol key shipping lanes, intercepting pirate vessels before they can regroup. Meanwhile, we'll deploy intelligence teams to infiltrate the pirate networks on land, cut off their supply lines, and turn their own spies against them. Across the table, Akainu's stern facade cracked into a thin smile. A surgical strike instead of a full-scale blockade. I like it. Hit them fast. Hit them where it hurts. Ching Pheasant nodded, already calculating logistics in his mind. We'll need to requisition extra transports and secure reliable informants in every major port, but with the right coordination, it could work. Sora folded his arms, confidence steadied in his gaze. Then it settled. Let's move out and remind the world why the Navy is the only force that truly keeps the seas safe. As the officers dispersed to put the plan into motion, a new sense of purpose filled the room. Chaos might be on the rise, but today at least, discipline and cunning would prevail. Marshal Sora stood at the head of the polished conference table, the glare of lanterns reflecting off his immaculate uniform. Around him, the Navy's senior officers exchanged uneasy glances. Outside, the moonlit seas were restless. Rumors of pirate activity had reached a fever pitch. With the greed that drives every pirate, they'll swarm toward the Grand Line entrance the moment we show weakness, Crane spoke quietly, but with enough resolve to carry across the chamber. If we confront them head-on there, our casualties will be catastrophic. A hush fell over the room. No one dared question Crane's proposal. His record advising Sora spoke for itself. Finally, Sora leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Elaborate. Crane nodded and swept a hand toward the sea chart spread before them. Our jurisdiction is the 4 seas. That's where our strength lies, but face it, the pirates outnumber us 10-1. We can't hope to purge them all. If we spread our fleets thin, we'll bleed men and ships until there's nothing left. He tapped the chart at the Grand Line's entry point. Instead, let's drive the pirates into the Grand Line and let them break themselves against one another. Once past that threshold, they'll be forced into the New World, the true heart of pirate power, dominated by the 3 great pirate alliances. There, they'll fight for supremacy. Meanwhile, we conserve our forces and maintain stability across the 4 seas. Silence reigned as the officers weighed the strategy. To some, it felt like abandoning the fight. To others, it was the only way to preserve the Navy's might. Sora rose, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. Very well, we'll hold our lines here and channel the pirate fleets toward the Grand Line. Let them squander their strength in the New World. Dismissed. As the assembly broke up, Crane allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The plan was set in motion, and soon the seas would bear witness to a conflict of pirates on a scale no navy could survive. Meanwhile, Marshal Sora's fleets would emerge stronger than ever. After Commander He finished speaking, a cold light flickered in his eyes. The assembled generals all turned to Crane, their expressions suddenly brightening as the brilliance of the plan struck them. Sora's eyes gleamed. He straightened in his seat. What do you all think of this proposal? He asked eagerly. Sengoku surveyed the room, then addressed the other officers. A thoughtful silence settled before heads began to bow in consideration. Finally, Warring States lifted his head and met Commander He's gaze. I fully support your approach, Commander, he declared. Chapter 437, One Piece's Crew. Sengoku's endorsement settled the matter. The other admirals exchanged glances and nodded in agreement. All right, Admiral Sora declared, slamming his fist on the conference table. The thunderous sound cleared away any lingering hesitation. Our Navy still faces a critical shortage of manpower. I propose that the world government authorize a global recruitment campaign, one that will raise our naval headquarters to at least 100,000 elite Marines. Only then can we hope to meet the challenges of this new age of navigation. Admiral Crane's eyes widened as he spoke up. 100,000 elite Marines? To put that in perspective, Marine headquarters has never housed more than 70,000 at its peak. We'd be increasing our elite force by almost 50%. A ripple of astonished murmurs ran around the room. A force of that size would overwhelm any pirate crew they'd encountered and ensure none could dare threaten the world government again. Admiral Kong was visibly taken aback. He recalled all too well the recent clash with Rockefeller Charles. In a single bold strike, that young prodigy had slain more than a dozen of the Navy's finest. The loss had stung so deeply that even Admiral Garp, whose reputation for composure was legendary, had struggled to contain his fury. Sora leaned forward, his expression resolute. Precisely because pirates like Charles keep becoming bolder, we cannot afford to fall behind. If we want to keep the seas safe, we must bolster our ranks now. Sengoku gave a firm nod. Very well, I will petition the Gorosei immediately for authorization. In the meantime, prepare the recruitment protocols and mobilize every available fleet to assist. The admirals stood together, united in purpose. With such an ambitious build-up on the horizon, Marine headquarters would be better equipped than ever to uphold justice, and to confront the threats rising on the world's oceans. Sora surveyed the eager faces of the naval generals and gave a decisive nod. Very well. I'll submit our application to Wuloxing. Let us initiate the greatest expansion in our Navy's history. A cheer went up from the assembled officers. Who among them wouldn't welcome such an opportunity? Sora allowed himself a small, rueful smile as he watched their jubilation. Deep down, though, he harbored serious doubts. The idea of instantly fielding elite warships was little more than wishful thinking. At most, the world government might agree to reinforce Navy headquarters with elite Marines, a concession unparalleled in recent memory. After all, it was only in response to the escalating pirate threat that the world government had loosened its grip on the fleet. Without that pressure, they would never have even appointed a marshal. And the Navy's reach extended far beyond headquarters. Dozens of branch bases dotted the globe. In the aftermath of recent skirmishes, only a handful of those outposts, chiefly those scattered around the Red Earth continent in the New World, remained operational. Yet, even these would need reinforcements if Sora's bold plan were to stand a chance. Despite the world government's tight grip, the first half of the Grand Line and the Four Seas are still studded with outposts, like stars scattered across the ocean, each one anchoring its stretch of sea. It's precisely to prevent any of these power centers from growing too strong that naval expansion remains so strictly limited. Sengoku studied the worried expression on Fleet Admiral Kong's face and at last grasped the situation. He sighed softly, then turned to his superior. "Admiral," he began, "in the aftermath of Roger's execution, disturbances broke out in Logatown. An escaped pirate's presence has sparked a mass breakout among the prisoners there." Kong's brow furrowed. "An escapee? How did he slip past our forces?" With that, Sengoku produced a photograph. The image showed a figure dressed in a gaudy clown suit, complete with a bright red nose that practically glowed. Vice Admiral Garp peered closely at Tay. He photo, recognition dawning in his eyes. "That's him, the kid from Roger's crew, isn't it?" A hush fell over the assembled officers. Garp's voice was low and grave. "Yes, he's known as Bucky the Clown, one of Roger's pirates. He vanished into the shadows at the moment of the execution. While our forces were busy rounding up the others on the island, he slipped away. With the world government's one-piece bounty program recruiting the sea's most notorious pirates, one name stood out above the rest: Crocodile, the self-styled Sand Crocodile. He first rose to infamy when he lost an arm in a challenge against Whitebeard, and then, refusing defeat, he lost the other arm before slipping away to join the Rockefeller pirates. There, he came face to face with their fearsome vice captain, Douglas Barrett, a man whispered to be descended from a devil fruit user whose very bloodline is cursed. Their battle raged across the deck and into the sea, neither side able to claim victory. It ended in a stalemate, word of which quickly reached the highest ranks of the Navy. When the warlord Sengoku learned that two of the Navy's greatest admirals, Akainu and Aokiji, had joined forces yet still failed to subdue Crocodile's band, he dispatched agents to gather every scrap of intelligence on the Rockefeller pirates. What they uncovered stunned him, and every admiral he shared it with. Crocodile's bounty, they discovered, was a mere 8 billion belly. "How can someone of his caliber carry such a modest price on his head?" murmured one admiral, studying Crocodile's wanted poster. Sengoku let his gaze drift over the questioning faces. Before Barrett, he lived quietly, he explained. No civilian ships attacked, no islands burned. But after that draw, he struck back at the Navy, sinking several warships in the first half of the Grand Line. Then he vanished. A hush fell over the assembled officers as they absorbed the implications. A man who could stand toe-to-toe with Barrett, who could evade two admirals working together, and yet whose bounty barely scratched the surface of his true power. Clearly, Crocodile was a threat the world government could no longer afford to underestimate. That's why the Navy didn't put out such a high bounty. Vice Admiral Crane's remark drew a tight, uncomfortable smile from Admiral Sora. "Crane, that's enough," Sora muttered, shooting him a warning glance. Ignoring the rebuke, Fleet Admiral Sengoku unrolled a fresh poster and affixed it to the announcement board. The face on it was unmistakable, hawk-like eyes, an expression of calculated menace. "This is Joralk Hawkeye's Mihawk," Sengoku announced. Known across the Grand Line's first half as the Navy Hunter, he seeks out swordsmen, particularly our own officers, to test his blade. His string of ruthless victories against them earned him that fearsome title. Even the most seasoned sword fighters among the admirals felt a chill. Crane leaned in, studying the intricate hawk emblem. Sora's brow furrowed as he imagined Mihawk cutting through marine ranks with surgical precision. Before anyone could speak, Sengoku's tone sank to a grave whisper. "Furthermore, our spies report that Mihawk may have ties to Charles Rockefeller." A stunned hush fell over the war room. Charles Rockefeller, the world's greatest swordsman, captain of the Rockefeller Pirates, one of the 4 emperors of the New World. Every admiral present stiffened. None could forget the devastation the Rockefeller Pirates had left in their wake. Fleet Admiral Sora sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by Admirals Sakazuki and Kuzan. "During your duel," he began, "you both sensed Charles Rockefeller's shadow in Mihawk, and we know the Rockefeller Pirates actually crossed paths with Mihawk at Whiskey Peak. There's something here we haven't uncovered yet." Sakazuki and Kuzan exchanged a look, then nodded gravely. Sora's hunch was confirmed. All eyes then shifted to the notorious clown seated before them. Buggy the Clown. The very thought of Buggy's crew members sent a chill through the VUA room. If Buggy were to forge alliances with the likes of Crocodile, Jorokle, or even Mihawk, the Navy would be facing a threat on the scale of the Roger Pirates. "We cannot allow that to happen," Sora declared. "Post the highest bounties we've ever offered. These are our top priority targets, the Buggy Pirates, and those 2 fighters who aided them." "Aye, Admiral," Commodore Crane responded, already gathering the ledger. He looked up. Buggy the Clown and his entire crew set their combined bounty at 1,000,000 berries. Admiral Kong leaned forward, offering a cautious nod. "That's a fair figure. Let's make sure they know the Navy won't sit idly by." Commodore Crane agreed. With that, the order was given, and the manhunt for Buggy and his allies was officially underway. After all, they haven't officially shown themselves to the public yet. If too many people get involved at once, it would only highlight the Navy's incompetence. Besides, the One Piece crew has more than earned that 1,000,000 belly bounty on their heads. Chapter 438, The Bucky Pirates. A gray dawn stretched across the east blue as Buggy's ship cut through the gentle swell. Suddenly, a voice rang out on deck. "Captain Buggy! Captain Buggy! Your bounty's been posted!" One of the crewmates brandished the day's marine bulletin, excitement shining in his eyes. Buggy whipped around in surprise as the pirate hurried toward him, paper fluttering in his grip. "Captain, listen to this. Your new bounty is 500,000,000 berries." At the shout, the rest of the crew swarmed forward, clustering around Buggy. Even Crocodile and Dracule Mihawk, who had been sitting quietly by a stack of barrels, turned to watch the commotion. The bulletin's headline read, "Buggy the Clown, former Roger Pirates crew member, instigated a riot at Gol D Roger's execution, and then led the Bucky Pirates in the burning, looting, and mass slaughter of Logatown, bounty now set at 500,000,000 berries, dead or alive." Buggy's face drained of color. 500,000,000 berries? His jaw dropped, and for a moment he could only stare. What in the world? Why would the Navy do this? A ripple of excitement and unease passed through the deck. One pirate leaned in and whispered, "Our captain's not exactly thrilled. After all, he did sail with the Pirate King himself." Buggy clenched his fists, confusion and fury battling in his eyes. The Bucky Pirates had just become the most feared and most wanted crew in the East Blue. Not 1,000,000, at least 1,000,000,000 if you want to match his status, a grizzled pirate muttered from the sidelines. Another scoffed. 1,000,000,000. No, make it 20,000,000,000. That's the only way to honor Lord Charles. His comrades all nodded in agreement. Charles felt as if his heart had stopped. 20,000,000 wasn't enough. They said they wanted 20,000,000,000. What on earth were they thinking? His hands shook as he glanced again at the bounty poster tacked to the mast. Each extra zero burned into his eyes, and he nearly lost his nerve on the spot. Just then, 2 more wanted posters fluttered down from above. A nearby pirate snatched them up and studied them in disbelief. At once his eyes lit up. Look, Lord Crocodile and Lord My Hawk have new bounties. Word spread instantly. One by one, more pirates gathered around. Soon even Crocodile and My Hawk themselves pushed through the crowd. My Hawk reached for the papers, his cold gaze flicking from print to print. Hawkeye Dracula My Hawk, he read aloud, voice low and steady, one of the fiercest fighters in the Charles Pirates, assisted in evacuating Rogue Town and inflicted heavy casualties on the Navy. Bounty, 6,000 belly, dead or alive. A hush fell over the onlookers. 6 billion? Charles stared at their faces, sweat trickling down his neck. If this was the kind of notice they were getting, he'd better steel himself for whatever lay ahead. The bulletin boards at every port were alight with the news. Sand Crocodile, the Bucky Pirates' notorious combatant, led the evacuation of Rogatown and cut down Navy forces by the score. A 5,000 bounty has been posted on him, dead or alive. A low murmur ran through the assembled crew. So Crocodile-sama and Mihawk-sama answer to Captain Bucky, huh? No wonder they risked everything to save us. With allies like that, Bucky-sama's bound for the throne of Pirate King. The pirates around him nodded eagerly, eyes shining with excitement. Bucky himself couldn't help but glance at the wanted posters fluttering on the yardarm, cheeks flushing at the praise. He'd seen Crocodile and My Hawk's power firsthand, and he knew just how audacious it was to rely on them. Just then, Crocodile and My Hawk lifted their heads in perfect unison. Their cold gazes fixed on Bucky, they each reached out, seized his shoulders, and, much to the crew's astonishment, escorted him below deck toward the captain's cabin. As the pair disappeared through the hatch, a collective gasp rose from the deck. Captain Bucky has that kind of bond with 2 of the world's strongest fighters? I'd give anything to sign on and sail alongside them. Inside the cramped cabin, tension crackled in the air. No one moved after Crocodile's blunt announcement until a sharp rap on the tabletop broke the silence. Spill it. How are we supposed to fix this? Someone demanded. Mihawk swung a long leg over the bench and planted his boot on the table. He glared across at Crocodile. Why don't we just pick an island, disembark the Marines there, and let the Navy sort it out? Crocodile's cold gaze drifted to Bucky, hunched in the corner. You boy, he growled, go tell the crew you're not under my orders. Bucky straightened, chest puffed out. All right, he said, but his voice wavered. Only, will the Navy even believe me? His hands involuntarily moved to his side pouch. In an instant, a glint of steel flashed as he unleashed his devil fruit power, slicing a single piece of fruit into a dozen razor-sharp segments midair. Mihawk's eyes narrowed. A devil fruit ability? He leveled a cold stare at Bucky. I don't care how you try to handle this, whether you plead your case to the Navy or cook up some other plan. I want no part of it. He hefted his black blade. Count me out. Crocodile gave a curt nod. Me too. The 3 of them exchanged silent, determined glances, each resolved to wash his hands of the problem, leaving Bucky alone with the consequences. Bucky's grin twisted into a grimace as he considered his only option. Well then, gentlemen, why not join the Bucky Pirates? You're both masters of your craft. We could use swordsmen of your caliber. Before he could add another word, a blade flashed. Mihawk's knife sliced through the air, narrowly grazing Bucky's coat. Startled, Bucky sprang back. Ha! You almost cut me in half, yet I still managed to dodge it. Mihawk's dark eyes widened in surprise. With a casual flick, he returned the dagger to its sheath and spoke in a cool, measured tone. My sole ambition is to become the world's greatest swordsman. I have no interest in captaining your crew. Crocodile stubbed out his cigarette and shifted his gaze from Mihawk to Bucky. He exhaled a plume of smoke. As for me, he said, I'm after the One Piece. Bucky laughed, the sound echoing off the wooden walls. Perfect. Our goals don't conflict at all. You, Mihawk, aim to hold the title of the greatest swordsman in the world. I can't train you, but I know exactly who holds it now. And you, Crocodile, seek to become the Pirate King. As a former member of Gol D Roger's crew, I've learned more than a few of his secrets. We could help each other immeasurably. Suddenly, the playful smile vanished from Bucky's face. He studied the two legendary pirates before him. Mihawk froze mid-sip, wine glass hovering at his lips. Crocodile's hand stilled on his cigarette. Both men regarded Bucky in silence. Bucky met their gazes evenly and, almost imperceptibly, smiled once more. The room fell into a heavy, expectant quiet. Bucky stepped out of the cabin, inhaling the fresh sea air. Mihawk and Crocodile fell in beside him, their faces thoughtful. But the sight before them made all three of them stop dead in their tracks. Scattered across the water, 5 or 6 small boats bobbed along, each one crowded with eager sailors. As soon as Bucky appeared, a roar went up from every deck. "Captain Bucky, please let us join your crew. Make you our captain." Bucky and the two swordsmen exchanged astonished glances. What on earth was going on? Recovering first, Bucky threw back his head and laughed. "Ha ha ha! Welcome aboard the Bucky Pirates, everyone." He stretched his arms wide, beaming at the flotilla of hopeful recruits. "Captain Bucky! Captain Bucky!" They shouted in a single voice. Hands on his hips, Bucky grinned like a man who'd just struck gold, turning to Mihawk and Crocodile with a triumphant laugh. Chapter 439, Chaos in the New World. For more than 20 years, the notorious clown Bucky had remained silent, until now. In a sudden turn of events, his voice has echoed across the seas decades ahead of schedule. Early morning light glinted off the waters of the East China Sea as a lone skiff drifted toward Siluobu village. At the oar sat Shanks, his trademark straw hat pulled low over his eyes. He paused mid-stroke to glance at the newspaper clenched in his hand. "Bucky," he murmured with a half-smile, "so you've finally found a partner. Don't think for a second you've got the upper hand. I'm coming for you." The boat nudged the sandy shore, where a young man with dark skin and a hawk-like nose stood fixed on the horizon. A gentle breeze ruffled his hair as he spoke to the empty sea. "What ship is that all of a sudden?" Shanks stepped ashore and strode right up to the stranger. "I'm looking for a man named Jesus Boo," he announced, voice calm and confident. Jesus Boo blinked in surprise, taking a step back. Shanks tipped his hat in greeting. "Name's Shanks," he said, "and I'm a pirate." Silence fell for a moment as Jesus Boo stared, stunned by this unexpected declaration. But the world doesn't pause for long. With one age ending, another inevitably begins, and the currents of fate are already shifting once again. In every age, new heroes step onto history's stage, the new world. "Damn it! These scum just won't quit," Robert panted, glaring at the fallen pirate at his feet. Boom, the deck shook from a distant explosion. "It's all Roger's fault. That blasted pirate king shouted his rallying cry, and now half the underworld's afloat, swarming the seas." Deidara slid down beside him with a heavy sigh. With the dawn of the Age of Discovery, the ocean had become a tinderbox. No single navy could hold back the 3 titanic pirate fleets carving up the new world. Whitebeard's crew, Big Mom's crew, and the Rockefeller pirates. The moment the first daring, or foolhardy band sailed into these uncharted waters, they discovered there was no authority left to stop them. Ships were set ablaze, crews slaughtered, treasure plundered. Every island fast became a beacon of pirate terror. Originally, Whitebeard, Big Mom, and Rockefeller had fought one another for the territories abandoned by the Roger pirates and the Sky pirates, but alliances and rivalries shifted with every sunrise. Suddenly, he turned and stared. Charles stood on the quarterdeck, eyes drifting between battered charts and a growing stack of urgent pleas for help. His once secure territory had all but vanished, torn apart by rival pirate crews warring over every scrap of land. He'd raced back the moment things turned dire, determined to purge the invaders, but the cleanup had become an endless nightmare. Every able hand in the Rockefeller pirates had been dispatched. Scouts scoured the 4 blues, skirmishers chased rumors from the first half of the Grand Line, yet no matter how many enemy ships they sent to the depths, more poured in. Even the 3 great pirate alliances, though they'd tempered their mass slaughters, continued to raid coastal villages and slaughter innocents. Once we finish clearing this island, there's another one waiting. Robert, Charles's first mate, said as he rose from the mission board. After that, maybe we'll finally get to rest on the ship. Deidara gave a helpless shrug and followed Robert toward the gangplank. Charles rifled through the distress reports, then called over his navigator. Kami, how many islands are still under attack? Kami glanced at the tumble of parchments. Too many, Captain. The New World is swarming with crews searching for the echoes of Roger's treasure. We liberate one island, and by the time we turn back, 2 more have been overrun. Carter, watching from the rail, added darkly, We're fighting a tide we can't turn. Every victory just draws in more marauders. Charles clenched his jaw. The sea breeze tugged at his coat, as if urging him forward. No matter how long it took, he'd see this war through, and he'd claim every last inch of his home. You can't kill all the captains. Carter's voice trembled with worry. Are the other 2 pirate crews in the same shape as us? Charles met his gaze, his expression just as grave. Yes, the Whitebeard pirates control the largest territory, and they've taken the heaviest losses. The Big Mom pirates aren't far behind. Their casualties are nearly as severe as ours. Carter let out a frustrated groan. Charles sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Roger will never go down quietly. I used to think the Navy suffered the worst in the Age of Discovery, but looking at these figures, it's clear they're bleeding out the most. You simply can't kill every last one of them. He glanced at a rough calendar tacked to the bulkhead. This stalemate could drag on for years, probably until about 1504 on the Hypnian chart. If memory serves, it was around 1504 in the Hayuan Reckoning when the 3 emperors finally asserted their authority in the New World and brought some semblance of peace. And right now, we're stuck in 1498. Charles shook his head. Everyone, make a note of this. We're in for the long haul. Prepare yourselves for a protracted battle. Charles surveyed the gathered officers and held up a freshly signed commission. By my order, he began, Esdeath is appointed captain of the 1st Division of the Rockefeller Pirates. She may recruit freely and will oversee the western half of the New World. Caesar is named captain of the 2nd Division, in charge of Wano country. Tesla will lead the 3rd Division, responsible for the Central Island. Report to your new commands immediately. At his words, Esdeath, Caesar, and Tesla snapped to attention and answered in unison, Yes, Captain. Charles nodded in approval, then turned toward 2 familiar faces at the back of the hall. Carter, Paul, don't think I've forgotten about you, he said, voice firm but fair. Since your divisional commands have been reassigned, I'm giving you equally important posts. The 4 of you will each govern a critical territory in the New World. Carter and Paul straightened, pride brightening their expressions. Charles continued, Carter, you are to establish your base on Kame Island and maintain its security and prosperity. Ralph, you'll take command in Wano country. See that order is kept and our interests protected there. A ripple of determination ran through the officers as Charles concluded, Detailed orders for each of you will follow. Dismissed. With that, the room buzzed with purpose, another step toward Charles's vision of a pirate empire that would dominate the seas. Charles surveyed his new officers with steady eyes. Paul, you're in command of Ska Island, the crossroads between the latter half of the New World and its very heart. Isaac, you take Cocker Island, linking the Central Seas to the New World's opening stretch. With the 4 of you anchoring our positions, the Rockefeller pirates will have an unshakable foundation. He paused, letting his words sink in. Paul, Isaac, Carter, and Esdeath straightened and answered in unison. Yes, Captain. Good, Charles continued. Carter, I want you to lead a small detachment to secure our critical choke points. Esdeath, you and your 3 lieutenants will form the Rapid Response Force. If any pirate dares cross our lines, even the most desperate fools, you'll know about it the instant they make a move. Strike hard and fast, no mercy. His gaze then fell on Barrett, who met it without flinching. Barrett, you and I will spearhead the push into the New World's first half. There's still vast territory unclaimed out there. Let's take as much of it as we can before anyone else even knows what's happening. Barrett nodded, a fierce grin spreading across his face. Charles allowed himself a satisfied smirk. There was work to be done, and the Rockefeller pirates were ready. Although the maneuver was risky, Charles felt no hesitation. "All right," he shouted, determination blazing in his eyes. Barrett mirrored his resolve with a fierce nod, and the Rockefeller pirate sprang into action. In the blink of an eye, the tide of battle shifted. Young deckhands raced up the rigging to stand shoulder to shoulder with veteran sailors, launching wave after wave of counterattacks. Their coordinated assaults shattered the overconfidence of the rival pirates, men who'd never imagined combat could reach such dizzying heights. Chapter 440. By the maritime lunar calendar, the year was now 499. After 6 tumultuous months, the Rockefeller pirates had finally found their footing. Though a few unruly corsairs still lurked among their ranks, none dared launch a direct assault on the Rockefeller fleet. Those who had tried were swiftly and brutally cut down. In the past half-year alone, the pirates had obliterated one enemy crew after another, each victory cementing their fearsome reputation. Stories of their thunderous reprisals spread like wildfire, and soon rival bands steered clear of their waters. Yet Charles understood all too well that this uneasy peace would not last. Sooner or later, fresh waves of newcomers, unaware of the Rockefeller pirates' growing empire, would venture into these seas, dazzled by the rich, uncharted isles under their control. When that happened, they would suffer the same fate as their predecessors. Still, Charles allowed himself a moment of pride. These past 30-odd months, from the second half of 1496 through 1499, had witnessed the Rockefeller pirates' greatest surge in power. Thanks to relentless strategy and overwhelming force, the fleet now stood stronger than ever, its dominion across the New World beyond question. And though dangers loomed on the horizon, Charles was determined that the Rockefeller name would remain supreme. The Rockefeller pirates' battles never seemed to end. First, we tangled with the Navy, then we skirmished against the Big Mom pirates, and before long, we were deep in liberating Wano country. Even after that victory, we found ourselves embroiled in the fight for islands throughout the first half of the New World. With Roger's death marking the dawn of the Age of Discovery, pirates poured into these waters by the thousands, but the Rockefeller pirates never paused. At last, after so many relentless campaigns, we'd secured a precious moment of calm. Across the fleet, sailors exhaled in relief. I felt the tight knot in my chest finally loosen. I looked at Carter and asked, "What's the situation in the New World right now?" Carter has his post on Kamai Island, but with me there, no short-sighted rival dares make a move. He spent his time gathering every scrap of information I asked for, news of the New World, updates on the Four Seas and the Grand Line. Carter hesitated briefly, then replied, "The New World is still in turmoil. The Whitebeard pirates are scrambling from one hot spot to the next, putting out fires wherever they appear." He trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. It was clear. The seas ahead would be every bit as chaotic as before, and the Rockefeller pirates would have to be ready. Carter spread out a map on the table and tapped a finger against the New World's eastern isles. Apart from the few islands where Big Mom's children hold court, nearly every other island is lit up with warning beacons. And aside from our Rockefeller pirates, who, thankfully, have held their ground, all the other crews are on the back foot. Word is, Whitebeard himself, Edward Newgate, has finally made his move. Charles leaned back, surprise flickering in his eyes. Whitebeard? He'd assumed the chaos of the New World was just another round of petty squabbles among cutthroats. He'd been far too occupied supervising his own children's training to pay much attention. Since the Age of Discovery shattered the seas 6 months ago, neither he nor his right hand Lingling had bothered to intervene. Carter's voice dropped. And his son, he's been slaughtering crews wholesale these past 6 months. Charles frowned. Massive casualties over half a year would certainly draw Edward Newgate out of hiding. His mind leapt to his own children, scattered across hostile waters. He waved dismissively. They were all strong enough to handle themselves. Then, almost on instinct, Charles rose from his seat. He reached behind the polished mahogany paneling, pressed a hidden latch, and withdrew a small, intricately carved wooden box. The cabin fell silent as he examined it, uncertain what its contents might unleash. Charles lifted the lid of the old wooden chest, revealing a dozen devil fruits nestled in straw, each one pulsing with strange, swirling patterns. A thrill ran through him. "It's time to strengthen them," he whispered. He raised his hand, and the maid promptly appeared at the doorway. Within moments, 12 children, each of whom had yet to taste a devil fruit, filed into the room, eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy! Daddy!" Their voices rang out as they spotted Charles seated at the head of a long table, the fruits laid before him like treasures. Among them, Simon and Ackerman bounced on the balls of their feet, impatience written all over their faces. They'd been waiting for this moment ever since they first learned of the fruit's legendary power, only for life's upheavals to delay their chance. Today, Charles refused to let them down again. He surveyed the dozen hopeful faces. Helud and Swifa, the eldest at 9, exchanged nervous but determined glances. 7-year-olds Simon, Rowling, and Ackerman fidgeted with barely contained excitement. The youngest 7, Rachel, Daisy, Sarah, Coffee, Tina, Powell, and Forties, each just 5 years old, clustered together at the back, craning their necks to see. Until now, Helud and Swifa had politely declined the offer, wary of the strange magic. Simon, Rowling, and Ackerman had simply been too busy exploring and training. As for the little ones, their curiosity outweighed any fear. Charles rose, the soft light of the veranda catching the vivid hues of the fruits, one banded in orange and white, another streaked with cobalt, a third veined in molten gold. "Children," he said, his voice both warm and solemn, "today each of you may choose a devil fruit. Remember, once consumed, its power bonds to you forever. Choose with care." A hush fell. Outside, a distant bird call chimed through the open window. One by one, the 12 stepped forward, hearts pounding with excitement, trepidation, and hope, reaching toward their future. At this point, Charles's devil fruit collection remains modest. What he has amassed so far includes natural category, mercury fruit, Superman type category, temperature fruit, stone fruit, glass fruit, momo fruit, cube fruit, fungus fruit, barrier fruit, paper fruit, weapon fruit, golden fruit, repulsion fruit, thorn fruit. Animal category, phantom beast subtype, bat fruit, vampire form, hama fruit, Chelan form. Animal category, ancient species. Subtype, Titaboa form, Archaeopteryx form, crocodile form, Triceratops form. Of all these, the Superman-type weapon fruit, the Superman-type golden fruit, and the ancient species Triceratops fruit were forged in combat, each dropped by pirate captains he defeated over the last 6 months. In fact, those 3 prizes are the only devil fruits worth adding to his roster during that time. While Charles has encountered other fruits, none matched the power or potential of these, and so they alone earned a place in his collection. Charles had spent the past few years gathering devil fruits by the dozen. Most of the animal-type fruits went straight to Caesar Clown, either forged into devil fruit-powered weapons or used in his artificial fruit experiments. A handful, rabbit and cat fruits, were quietly handed off to the maids. His motives were his own. Now only 19 fruits remained, and once today's distribution was over, there'd be almost nothing left. He stood before 12 hopefuls. Charles raised his voice. "Step forward. Take the oldest devil fruit first." His eyes settled on Herod, who'd famously declined a fruit the last time they met. Would he refuse again? As Charles watched, Herod's son, Helud, shifted beside him. Helud wrapped his hand tighter around his sword's hilt and looked up at his father. "Dad," Helud said, voice firm, "I don't want a devil fruit. I want to be a swordsman, just like you." Charles held Herod's gaze for a long moment. Then he inclined his head and said, "Very well. I value you. Our decision," Charles declared firmly. He would never force any of his children to eat a devil fruit. Caesar's ingestion of one had been a complete accident, and yet, without that fruit, his extraordinary talents would have remained hidden. Charles met his son's uncertain gaze and offered a reassuring smile. "I trust you to choose your own path." Chapter 441, Distributing the Devil Fruits, Part 1. Caesar's hulking frame, combined with the phantom beast devil fruit, made him a true powerhouse. At just 15 years old, he already wielded strength befitting a quasi-general. So when Herod declined Charles's offer of a devil fruit, it didn't come as a surprise. As the father of 29 children, Charles had watched each of them grow, quietly tracking their talents and personalities from infancy to adolescence. Take Helud, for example. He'd spent the past few years training in swordsmanship under his eldest sister, Esdiath. Though he remained far weaker than devil fruit users like Klein, his unwavering perseverance convinced Charles that one day Helud would forge his own path to strength. Talent ran in the family, and Charles believed in it wholeheartedly. Once Herod had made up his mind, Charles turned to Swifa. "And you, Swifa, do you want to try a devil fruit?" Swifa hesitated. Her eyes drifted to the twin blades at her waist before she looked back at her father. "No, thank you. I'd rather focus on mastering my swordsmanship." Swifa, too, politely declined. Charles listened quietly and offered Swifa an encouraging nod. Then he turned to Simon. "Simon!" At the sound of his name, Simon bounded across the room, practically bouncing off the walls. Charles couldn't help but smile at the little whirlwind. "All right, buddy, pick one." Simon's eyes lit up as he took in the dazzling array of devil fruits lined up before him, each one more peculiar than the last. But he didn't hesitate. He pointed straight at the shiny silvery orb, the mercury fruit. "Dad, I want this one, the mercury fruit," he announced, his voice brimming with excitement. Charles reached out, plucked the mercury fruit from the table, and tossed it to Simon. "Here you go. Go on, take a bite." Simon gripped the fruit in both hands and chomped down. Immediately, an indescribable foul stench erupted in his mouth, like rotten eggs mixed with rust. His eyes widened, and he recoiled. "Ugh!" Simon gagged, spitting out the fruit in a spray of silver juice. The fruit fell back onto the table, bearing only a single tooth mark. On the verge of tears, Simon wiped his mouth, trembling. It stinks!" Charles crouched beside him, offering a comforting smile. "Hey, don't worry, we'll find you something better." Simon sniffed once more, still unconvinced, but allowed his father to guide him toward the next tempting and hopefully less revolting choice. "Though I'd heard from my siblings that devil fruits were revolting, I never imagined they'd taste this foul." "You crave great power, yet you can't even stomach one bite?" Charles mocked, watching Simon wrestle with the fruit in his trembling hand. Under their father's stern gaze, Simon bit down hard. Half the fruit vanished in a single mouthful. A moment later, his cheeks puffed out, and a rancid scent filled his nostrils. He fought the urge to gag as his eyes watered. "Simon, swallow it," Ackerman barked from the side. Charles cracked a crooked smile. This brutal initiation had nearly become a Rockefeller family tradition. Helud and Swifa exchanged amused looks. Neither had ever tried a devil fruit themselves, but they knew all too well how dreadful the taste could be. Simon's lips quivered. He'd never suffered like this before. Beads of sweat formed at his temples as he forced himself not to spit it out. With one last gasp, he swallowed the offending pulp, then wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "There," Charles said coldly. "Now feel your own power." Simon closed his eyes and lifted his arms, bracing himself. Immediately, a surge of energy rippled through him, an unfamiliar heat, a strange tingling under his skin. Charles leaned forward in his chair, eyes gleaming. Visions flickered behind Simon's eyelids, swirling colors, fleeting images of monstrous strength, endless possibilities. "And there's more where that came from," Charles declared triumphantly. Simon's heart pounded as the visions threatened to overwhelm him. "Quickly, see." Charles held up a hand and shouted, "Stop!" In an instant, the visions vanished, leaving Simon gasping for breath and on the brink of something extraordinary. Simon lifted his hand, glancing anxiously at his father. "Open the windows and doors," he urged. Charles turned to the maid standing nearby and issued the order. At once, the windows and heavy doors swung wide. A blast of frigid air rushed in, sending a shiver through everyone in the room. A dreadful thought struck Charles. Whenever Simon activated his devil fruit power, his body liquefied into mercury. Mercury alone was dangerous, but it secreted a lethal gas, something no ordinary person, least of all a child, could withstand. Simon blinked against the cold, and then a sudden "ah-choo" burst from him. To Charles's horror, the boy didn't spray mucus. He sneezed pure mercury. Tiny beads of the glowing liquid metal clattered onto the floorboards and rolled in every direction, shining like quicksilver under the chandelier's light. Charles's heart pounded. He strode to a drawer beneath his desk and retrieved a heavy bracelet of Seastone, the one sure way to suppress devil fruit abilities. "Here," he said, holding it out to Simon. "Put this on. Don't take it off until you've learned complete control." Simon's eyes widened at the sight of the polished black cuff, but he didn't refuse. His hands trembled as he slid it over his wrist and clicked it closed. He braced himself for the familiar drain of strength, but it never came. He glanced up, confusion and relief warring on his face as Charles watched him carefully, wondering what had changed. Charles glanced up at his father, puzzled. "What is this?" Simon knelt down and retrieved a small, polished stone from his coat. "It's called Sea Tower Stone, our science division's latest creation. Its purity is off the charts. It won't strip a devil fruit user of their powers. It simply suppresses them for a time." Charles studied the smooth, dark pebble. Simon continued, "We designed it after seeing so many of the captain's children struggle to control their devil fruit abilities. Remember that little incident in the lab? We can't afford a repeat, especially not with your mercury mutation. If you unleash it without restraint, those toxic vapors could be lethal in enclosed spaces. You must not activate your powers around people until you've mastered them. Understood?" "I understand, Father," Charles said, straightening his shoulders. Simon's face lit up. He tousled Charles's hair, then stood and nodded toward the next child waiting in line. Charles turned to Luo Lin, the captain's shy ninth daughter. Quiet and demure, she rarely ventured into the spotlight. At Charles's friendly wave, she tiptoed forward, cheeks flushed. "Go ahead, choose one," Charles said, gesturing to the devil fruits arranged on the table. Luo Lin swallowed, stepped closer, and reached out toward her first true test. Simon made his pick first, leaving 16 devil fruits laid out before them. Early that morning, Charles had already slipped away to claim the 2 Phantom Beast devil fruits, tucking them safely into his satchel. Now it was Rowling's turn. She studied the remaining fruits with wide-eyed curiosity. Their teacher's words rang in her ears. Devil fruits are the sea's greatest treasures, exceedingly rare, each starting at millions of Baileys in auction. Yet here, her father had brought more than 10 of them. How on earth had he managed to collect so many? Devil fruits come in 2 basic types, paramecia, which grants superhuman abilities, and zoan, which allow the eater to transform into an animal. Rowling shivered at the thought of a beast-based fruit. She'd already seen what Brother Logan and Brother Leonard had chosen, and she had no desire to become part beast. Instead, she turned her attention to the paramecia. Among those, one fruit in particular caught her eye, the paper fruit. Why was she so drawn to it? Perhaps it gave the power to create or control paper. She simply didn't know. Still, the moment she laid eyes on it, she felt compelled to choose it. With a decisive nod, Rowling reached out and claimed the paper fruit as her own.